Welcome to What If I Don't Like It? I'm your host, KT Baldassaro, and this episode we're talking with writer, journalist, and pop culture expert Bonnie Burton about the 1994 horror fantasy Interview with a Vampire. Welcome to episode 24 of What If I Don't Like It? And like I just said at the top, we're going to be talking to Bonnie Burton about her experience watching Interview with a Vampire, despite having actively avoided it her entire life and very, very much loving vampires, Anne Rice, and the novel. And episode 24, if we do 2 every month, means this is the final episode of season 1 of What If I Don't Like It? And in her own special way, Bonnie gave us a very interesting episode in that we broke format. I always knew that this would happen somewhere. Someone was going to get their wires crossed and show up to the part 1 recording having already watched the movie. And Bonnie did do that. So we won't have a part 1 and a part 2 in this episode. We'll just have one big long middle where we go crazy talking about the experience, why she hasn't seen it or hadn't seen it, and what she felt like having now seen it. And this is kind of a good time to ice break the fact that as we approach season 2, I'm exploring a different way to tweak our format. So you'll continue to see a slight switch and change in the way that this show is coming to you. Like, for example, now, this episode will have, for the first time ever, visuals all the way through. You get to see Bonnie's beautiful face talking to you throughout this episode. She is a very gifted podcaster who comes on a lot of different shows. You see her with Felicia Day talking about books. You see her on her own show, The Night Shift, with Renee Roon and Jenna Hayes talking about movies. By the way, they just did an episode on The Substance. It's going to be in the liner notes, and you should check it out. Renee, who was on that episode with Bonnie, will be on the Movie Night Extravaganza episode on the 29th, talking about The Substance again. I talked about The Substance earlier this month with Alex Gentry. We're going to have a watch party on our Discord. If you haven't seen The Substance, we're not so subtly telling you that you really need to see The Substance. I, for one, am seriously hoping that the Academy starts to look at horror films for the first time genuinely this year, because Demi Moore's performance in this is definitely worth nominating. I do think that SAG will notice it. It's too good to not. Other than that, what you really should be watching is today is the 15th, and today on Movie Night Extravaganza, we're having a very special Friday episode. And you're like, oh, Friday episodes are probably Renee, right? As much as I love Renee, this Friday episode is actually someone else. It is Adam McKay, writer, director. You know him from many things. I think the most recent thing I saw from him was Don't Look Up. So you can imagine he's a perfect person to talk to about politics in our current world right now. And that is what we're going to do. The Movie Night crew has got him on 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to do a lot of talking about their work in film, their work in comedy, and we're obviously going to wind up talking about politics. He has a no-holds-bar style on Twitter, and we'll see how it goes tomorrow with us all in our crazy open format style. I'm genuinely excited. If you can't make it to us live, joining live means you get to say stuff in the chats. Super chats means that what you say will get shown to Adam McKay. Join us. Don't worry too much. That episode will be aired, obviously, after the fact. You can go to a YouTube channel. You'll see that in the liner notes as well. It'll be available to see. We talked about Pearl this last week on Tuesday. That was a great conversation. I really enjoyed that film. It's there to look right now because you didn't join us live. And yeah, I think that's really all I'm going to give you guys at the top here. We're really excited to get into that. Jump right in with Bonnie Burton and see how this new format goes. And if you're listening to this on the podcast format and you do want to see Bonnie's face, well, it's going to be on the cover art. You'll see it there. But, head over to YouTube. Click on the liner notes. You'll get to see this episode. Welcome to episode 24 of What If I Don't Like It? I'm joined by Bonnie Burton today, and we're going to talk about a film that she's been avoiding for quite some time. Much like me in the last film, Dusk Till Dawn, you've been avoiding Interview with a Vampire for how many years?
Oh, no, you're going to make me do math. So it's 2024. It came out in 1994. I moved to San Francisco from Denver. I went to college in University of Colorado at Boulder, and I grew up kind of Kansas, Colorado, but I lived in a lot of different places. But I was going to graduate from college in, I think, 1995, and then 1990, and I worked for Apple, and then 1996 I went off to San Francisco, mainly because of Anne Rice's book, Interview with the Vampire, takes place there, and some of Lestat and Queen of the Damned. And Interview with the Vampire was my favorite book. So remember that comment, which is why when casting happened for this movie, I already had been reading this book. I read the book so much. I had like a cheap paperback that I got because back in the day, before online books, before streaming, before you could just, look something up online and read it, you were a slave to your public library. And if the public library didn't have it, or if it was always checked out, then of course you bought it at a bookstore like Walden Books or whatever was a bookstore back then, because there weren't big bookstores yet. Or at the airport, if it was on the New York Times bestseller list, it would be in the airport, bookstores and stuff.
Mhm.
But I remember I bought it at a used bookstore with my usual Stephen King stuff and Dean Koontz books that I was reading. Clive Barker, the usual, right? And I was a big Chelsea Quinn Yarbrough fan, who wrote the Saint Germain Chronicles, which is a great vampire series. It's historical fiction. It's really great. And I got this book because of the cover. Also, I was into vampires because I was a little Wednesday Addams kid. So I loved everything horror and vampires. And I cannot tell you how fast I fell in love with this book, with the characters, with the description. And it really influenced, I think, that book series and Tales of the City, which is not a vampire series.
I was going to say, I don't.
Regular human series, but it's also very queer friendly, and it's also takes place in the 70s all the way up to the 90s, by Armistead Mopan, I think. Those two books made me want to move to San Francisco sight unseen. I never visited. I had a job waiting for me in in what would become, the Silicon Valley, but back then it wasn't yet. So I was doing R&D for Apple and Knight Ridder Information Design Lab, who were kind of the precursors to the iPad. So when I moved to San Francisco, I didn't know anything except from the books and obviously movies, right? Because San Francisco's been the backdrop of movies forever. But that book series, I went on a hunt and found all the places that were mentioned in Interview with the Vampire and Vampire Lestat. A lot of it takes place in San Francisco. The Talmasca is in San Francisco. That's the Watchers group that you see in the Mayfair Witches. They show up a lot. They're kind of like, if you watch Buffy, they're the Giles of Anne Rice's world. They keep tabs on the non-humans, but they're not supposed to interfere. They're just kind of like, they check you out. And I was obsessed. I was so obsessed with this book. And also I was young. So I was like, oh, there's got to be something real to it, right? Because I wanted vampires to be so real. And I was goth. Before goth was goth, I was a death rocker, I think is what they used to call us. It was like the 80s, right? And I felt so alienated because there weren't other goths in my town. There weren't really, at college, it was like raver culture. It wasn't really goth. So those books were an escape to me. And because of that, and I think anyone who loves a certain kind of franchise to death, whether it's this, right? Like Anne Rice's world, or Star Wars or Star Trek or Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones or whatever, when you start from and that's a weird thing to mention because those things didn't start. Game of Thrones did, but the others, and Lord of the Rings did, but not Star Wars and Star Trek didn't start off with, those were always supposed to be movies and TV shows. They didn't start necessarily with a book series for many years before it became a thing. And when I got this book, when you read books, you cast people in them as the characters. You either cast actors you love, right? Actors you love, or just you mix actors you love into one human, like Replicant or Frankenstein monster style or something. And so I was, early. I'm trying to think of how old I was. Probably 20, maybe 21 when it came out. 20 probably. And I did not want to see it because I saw that Tom Cruise was cast as Lestat, and that was not my first pick. By the way, if you do research on this, Anne Rice wrote these books in the 60s.
Not her first pick.
Not her first pick. Her first pick for Lestat was Rutger Hauer, who, as you know, was from Blade Runner. He was a very top actor at the time.
I think he would have been very good choice.
Oh my God, I would have loved that. But it's funny because us vampire fans and horror fans, we grow up to be writers and directors and producers of movies and TV shows. And we can talk about the Interview with the Vampire TV series briefly if you want at some point. But what I love is that we have this shorthand, this lexicon, this like, oh yeah, we like to do shout outs, right, to our favorite things and when we create things. And when you watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the movie, the main vampire, the head, the sire is Rutger Hauer. And I think that was maybe Joss Whedon's call out to the fact that he was supposed to be Lestat and the reason he wasn't because he didn't want to do it or because it was
the
because
casting didn't want to do it.
Interview with a Vampire was in development hell, which is what we call when you basically get your book, you write a book, it becomes a hit, someone wants to option it, you go back and forth with contracts. I don't know why I'm talking like it's happened to me because it hasn't yet, but like I have. But anyway, it goes back and forth. Eventually, things get signed. Eventually, a screenwriter is attached. Anne Rice is quoted as being the screenwriter of this film. She's not. Yes. Neil Jordan, the director, wrote most of it, but I think because of whatever the rules were for the guild, also I think who knows? But her books were amazing, by the way. So it's not like she couldn't write it, but because it was in development hell, I think for 15, 20 years. By the time it got greenlit to really be made, Rutger Hauer had retired. I don't even think he was really doing anything. And I don't think he had any, and you couldn't have an old guy play Lestat, right? It has to be someone that looks at least sort of young, at least in his 30s, right? Because you can't do that. So, and their CGI didn't exist for that.
They were also talking about John Malkovich as a choice
at
the time.
The one I love the most, though, was Tom Hanks. Was supposed to play Lestat, but he did a movie called Forrest Gump instead.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is 1994. I just did a whole series on Tom Hanks and where he is in this particular point in time.
And it is interesting because, it is interesting, too, to think about this because you have to remember contracts for movies are from books to movies are so different now as opposed to 90s, 80s, 70s. The rules are different legally. The rules are different for Writers Guild, Directors Guild, all of the guilds involved, all the labor laws involved. Very rarely, and I mean, if you know anything about Stephen King movies, very rarely does the author ever get to pick the director or where they may or may not go with the book. Stephen King notoriously hated Kubrick's version of The Shining because if you watch the movie The Shining and then read The Shining, the book, they're two different. They could be two different movies, two different everything. Yeah. I love the movie.
Just talk to Alan Moore about any of this.
Oh, Alan Moore. Oh, our curmudgeon Alan Moore. Yeah. You talked, this is just a rite of passage as a best-selling author. If you ever have anything optioned, if you're smart and savvy and willing to maybe go down a few million, you can have creative control. But that's so rare. And a lot of studios won't do that. A lot of studios will not give directors even final cut. So sometimes those movies that you think are going to be great because the director's great aren't, because there's somebody in the production studio or not production studio, but the producers or a CEO or, if you look at the lore of Star Wars, if the CEOs of the studio before George created Lucasfilm, and that's why Lucasfilm is Lucasfilm, is so he could have complete control over Star Wars for the whole time he was doing Star Wars. There was a point where he got in the first Star Wars, Star Wars New Hope that came out in 1977. He got notes while he was making it in England from producers and not producers, I'm sorry, but the studio execs that they thought that you shouldn't have a naked character. So Chewbacca almost had to wear pants, almost had to wear lederhosen. No joke. So when you think about, and I think I'm sure there's plenty of places online you can search and just do a Google search or a Bing search or whatever that says, horror stories on the set of films about producer notes or something. And you will see how many movies could have been ruined if the director paid attention or really respected the studio notes. So I do know that in very many I do believe in parallel universes. It's the only way I get through my life as a human, knowing that there's other universes where I'm happier and more successful. I know there's a parallel universe. I know there's a parallel universe with Tom Hanks as Lestat. That would be an interesting Interview with the Vampire. Same as with, Johnny Depp, who is what I wanted. I wanted Johnny Depp as Lestat. It was never going to happen. It's just not the universe I live in. I'm sure there's another universe where there was a different director attached, where maybe David Lynch directed this, or maybe Tim Burton directed this, or, it's just, I always think about those things because I love movies so much, and I am part of that world. And I've worked at studios like Lucasfilm for 10 years, and like I know how the sausage is
Yeah.
made. And I also write movies, but also I have so many friends who are actors and directors, and behind the scenes with makeup, costume, creature creation, stunt work, whatever. So I know how much it takes to make a movie, just not just financially, but the people involved. And but when you have a beloved story, a beloved book series, because Interview with a Vampire, then later Vampire Lestat, then after that Queen of the Damned, it became this trilogy that every goth kid read and memorized. I used a quote from Lestat as my senior quote in my yearbook. It was creepy as hell. I don't
Which
post
quote?
Columbine world. I think it was I think it said something like, I did not value, it wasn't until, was it something about murder? I think it was like, I didn't value life until I drained it from another human being. I don't know. It was something like that. It was
It's
something
so
like, I
crazy
valued
and
life.
not at all slightly related to being in high school. Not even like a parallel. Maybe she means like, oh no, just a vampire quote.
Oh no, I was like full on goth, and I looked more like, I mean, now I look tamer, but back then I was doing the whole Cleopatra, Susie, and the Banshees makeup, and I had curly hair, so like I straightened it with a crimping iron, so it was like even more out there because her hair was so out there. And I just and I wore Halloween clothes because back then there was no Hot Topic for us where we
Oh
lived, and
God, no.
you had
Yeah.
Rit dye and you basically learned to sew, or you just bought everything during Halloween, or
Yeah.
you stuck up on Rit black dye. Rit's a brand name of clothing coloring
Yeah.
dye, and I would just go to
Fantastic dye.
Goodwill. Oh my God, I would just go to Goodwill and dye everything black. So I was like, I was wearing goth spree clothes, and like, because
Jeez.
I was, but I was so part of that. I was so obsessed with this book, and when I was obsessed with this book and the book series as a whole. So when and again, this is an era before the internet really took off. So you didn't have, like, if you wanted to know casting news, you had to subscribe to Variety, which was very expensive back then. It was a trade magazine, like a trade newspaper. There weren't a ton of magazines, really. Rolling Stone, Entertainment Weekly had some stuff, but you really had to like and there was no internet, so you're not talking to people, right? So you're just kind of trying to figure out, okay, if they were going to cast this movie, who would be your actors? And Johnny Depp came close for me because I loved Johnny Depp. I loved Winona Ryder. I wanted her in it. It was an era of both of them dating at that time. And Beetlejuice,
Yeah.
I think, I don't remember when Beetlejuice came out, but it feels like it was around before 94.
Well, you
And
make a really
so,
interesting point because there's a lot of casting choices here that go against the grain and get criticized
but
really
there's some
weird.
good
Like,
ones. There's some
yeah.
good ones,
Well,
because Brad Pitt,
yeah.
let me tell you, I would have not thought,
That was not
'cause
supposed to be it. That was supposed
I
to be
would
Joaquin River Phoenix. He died, and so it couldn't have been
no,
him.
River was supposed to play Christian Slater's character.
Was that it?
River was supposed to play the interviewer, and then River, unfortunately, he died outside the Viper Room, and they just had to scramble to get
Hmm.
someone, and Christian Slater got it because I think Heather's, he was like, he was in Gleaming the Cube was where he kind of got to start. And then Christian Slater obviously became an icon from Heathers, from Pump Up the Volume. He was
Oh
like the
God,
it
yeah.
guy. Yeah, he was the it guy. So, and I highly recommend watching Pump Up the Volume. It's great soundtrack, great 90s time capsule of being a teenager in the 90s. But I would say that, I'm glad they picked Christian because he's also friends with those guys. And he gave his salary, which was a lot at that point, a lot of money for just a very tiny role. It's a $250,000, which now is peanuts. But back then, that's pretty substantial for
That's a
not a
quarter of a
huge
million
role.
dollars.
He,
Yeah.
he split it into two and gave it to two charities that River Phoenix loved. So
Oh, that's such
I
a
thought that
lovely
was
thing to have done.
yeah, I thought that was
That
very
is a
sweet because,
lovely thing to have
well,
done.
because there's a lot of criticism because, everyone was River was such an amazing actor. I want to say his last movie might have been Sneakers with Robert Redford. It's a great hacker CIA spy movie. I love it. He was also played young Indiana Jones in the Young Indiana Jones series, and
I
also
do
River was
love
in
that.
so many great indie movies, and it makes me so sad that he was taken from us at such a early age, and same with Heath Ledger, right? Because they were such iconic actors and so good at being chameleons. And I know he would have loved to do this movie. Quite frankly, if he hadn't died and was in this movie, which I'm sure in a parallel universe happened, I would have probably been upset that he's such a good actor. I'd be like, oh, he's wasted as the interviewer. He should have been Lestat, he should have been Louis, or he should have been
Yeah.
Armand, right? But
I really could
the
have seen him as Louis, yeah.
yeah, so the casting choices, I would have Brad Pitt was an interesting choice because I think, he was the hot guy in Thelma and Louise, right? And I don't
That's
think
it, yeah.
California. Yeah, I don't. What was the movie he did with his girlfriend at the time, Juliette Lewis, who's also iconic? Was It
Mhm.
was California with a K? Is that right? Or no, not True
Ooh.
Romance. No, Natural Born Killers. That's what it was.
Yes,
No,
sorry.
that's another one. That's another one. I'm mixing them
That's
all up,
Woody
by the way.
Harrelson, but that is Juliette Lewis.
Yeah, so I'm trying to there was a movie where Brad Pitt played a killer, I think. Or was I'm thinking 12 Monkeys? Doesn't matter. My point is, he was a good actor, but he wasn't.
12 Monkeys is 1996, so that is the time
Okay, so
period.
I would say Brad Pitt was an interesting choice. He was not my first choice for Louis. I had my
Mhm.
own. Also, I loved bands. So for me, like the lead singer of the band The Cult, Ian, was it Ian Ashbury? He would have been great as Louis. But but they don't act. I was just going off of posters and music videos, right? So
Oh, yeah. I
I
mean,
just
throw Henry Rollins in there, why not? He's great, I love him, he's good
right?
to look
So I
at, I
mean,
don't know.
Henry Rollins is such a weird cat because he's such an icon in the punk industry and he did poetry and started his own publishing
Yeah.
company, but also he's such an interesting actor that just pops up in things. And so anyway, what I was gonna say is,
Right.
Brad Pitt was pretty good, so I had no problem
Mhm.
with Brad Pitt as Louis. It was Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise and the styling choices, because the way they make, and granted, there are no book covers where you see the vampires as the
Yeah,
vampires.
so I wanted
So
to
you
say the
don't.
book cover that made you pick it up, what did it look like? Like, what
I
was
wish
the
I
thing
still
that pulled
had
you
it.
in?
I wish I still had it. It was I feel like it wasn't there wasn't a vampire face on it. So there were no humans.
Okay.
I think it was like red and maybe I can't remember. I wish I had thought to grab a screen grab of it. Maybe in post you can fix it and put
In
it up,
post, yeah,
but
we'll put it up, yeah.
yeah, but even I think Queen of the Damned, I don't even think had any. So and Lestat didn't either. So I don't think there were faces on it, which I think is a very
Which is
intelligent choice of
smart,
the
yeah.
publisher. That's another thing. Authors never get to choose their book covers. I mean, my book covers, I think I got to choose one. It was the Star Wars craft book, but the only reason I got to choose is I was also working at Lucasfilm in the marketing department. So I think I was just so annoyingly wanting to be involved in what it was going to look like. But most authors don't get to choose what their book covers look like. So when you
Yeah.
pick up a book where it's quintessential characters, it's very smart of a publisher not to put some like model or somebody's face on it like they do with romance books, because then that's who you think. If you leave it up to your imagination, books will be better sellers because people
Much
are already
better.
projecting whoever they have a crush on, whether it's like someone in their life in real life, or maybe it's a historical figure, or maybe it's someone in movies, music, who knows, right? So
Just even
you don't
someone of
want to
their
do.
own ethnicity, that's something that you don't get to see when you pick that for the reader, like, everybody says that they saw Hermione as white, I'm like, "Did you really read the description? I mean, I guess if that's what you wanna see, but, like, leaving it open-ended, that's kind of crucial."
It's crucial. And it is interesting because there are graphic novel and comic book adaptations of this. There's manga, there's
Mhm.
anime, there's porn, there's everything for Interview
Of
with Vampires.
course.
So, there's a I feel like there was a video game at some point. I don't
Mm.
remember, but like Vampire Masquerade was my D&D back then, in the
Okay,
late 80s.
so
Yeah. So
I just
that's
wanna
so
say
those characters I kind of just projected onto this series too.
yeah. I wanna take a Vampire Masquerade tangent for a hot second because I
Right.
referenced Vampire Masquerade in the last movie night, and I was like, "You know who should be here and probably played that? Bonnie." It's my
Oh, I
husband
didn't
is
just
playing a
play it.
game of it right now.
I didn't just play it. I was the I guess you wouldn't call it a dungeon master, like a cave master or something, but I was the one who
Call it.
run the game. Also, it took me forever to find people because D&D was such an iconic. I learned D&D at 4-H, and 4-H is this thing. I grew up. My first part of my
That's
childhood
a
was in
great
Kansas.
sentence.
Yeah, first part of my childhood was in Kansas. Second part, junior high. As more like high school, college was Colorado because we moved around a lot, but it was always in farm communities. So, or very rural, very like
Mhm.
dirt road kind of existence. And I was an introvert that loved books, and I'm not good.
Mhm.
I'm good at making friends. I'm not good at keeping them because now I know I'm very ADHD, but back then I was just a talkative kid that was into weird stuff that no one else was into. So my parents, I think, were a little worried about my social, I wasn't good at sports. I ended up in dance, which was fine, but those girls were pretty
Mhm.
snobby too. Ballet
They're
girls are not
really
nerds.
mean. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah, they're
ballet is the
mean.
worst of them.
They're
Oh.
probably the worst bullies I ever had, after me for a long I mean, I had eating I don't wanna get into it, but I had, like, mental
Not good
distress, let's just put
times.
it that way. All the
Just
things
picture
you
your
would think.
average ballet experience.
Yeah, and Black Swan's not far off, so it's pretty bad. So,
Mhm.
I just had a hard time making friends and connecting with people, but I had such a vivid imagination, and I loved writing stories and acting out plays with puppets and dolls and things, and, this is way before internet, way before YouTube, way before you could just connect with people. And 4-H was like it's like Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts smushed together, but also you learn
Mhm.
about farming and agriculture and animals. Because a lot of it is about, the beginnings of you're either gonna be a rancher or a farmer or a veterinarian, right? It's in that realm.
Mhm.
But there are a lot of nerds that were forced into 4-H by their parents. So because they were antisocial or neurodivergent before that was this was not an era of psychology. In
I don't have
the
that word at that
1970s,
time.
it was if you were sad, it was because you didn't have enough to do. That was the parents' thing, right? So it's like, well, I remember I once told my mom when I was, like, very young, "I'm bored," and I remember her saying, "Only boring people get bored," and that
Me
stuck with me
too,
forever.
yes.
Stuck with me forever.
Yeah.
So then, I was like, "Oh, well, then I'll just write stories or draw or act out plays with the farm dogs or do something." And 4-H
Mhm.
was trying to, like, make me not so feral because I was such a wild nerd introvert Wednesday Addams character that my parents were like, "We gotta put her with normal kids so she'll, like, learn how to be normal." And they put me with normal kids, but a lot of those kids were either kinda cowboy, rodeo, 3rd generation, 4th generation rodeo people or farm people, or they were nerds trapped on a farm, which is what I was, and we were all little Luke Skywalkers trying to get off the farm. And I learned how to computer code using Ranger Rick magazines. Like that was an old magazine. The back of those magazines showed you how to do basic coding. So that's where I learned coding and computer stuff when computers were brand new and kids were just like on their parents. No, there was no home computers. Like you went to the library or you went to some military brat kids home. That's where the computers were. We
Mhm.
didn't have them in schools. They weren't in the libraries yet. But also, we were nerds, so we, like, loved science fiction, loved horror, loved fantasy, and so D&D, we were supposed to learn chess, but instead we took it over and was like, "Nah, we're gonna do D&D." So we taught each other D&D in 4-H, and it became this giant thing, and then when I moved to Colorado in junior high, which is the worst time to move a kid in junior high because that's
Oh.
prison. Junior high is like prison rules, especially for girls. And I was just like, I don't know I'm into like cool stuff, but I can't there's no D&D group. And I transformed our junior high chess club into a D&D group. And then in high school, I made them do Masquerade because Masquerade came out around that time. And Masquerade is just
Yeah.
like Dungeons and Dragons, but it's with vampires. And it's
Yeah.
got and I would say to people watching this, maybe going, ugh, I hate hearing about all this dumb role playing, tabletop gaming thing. Why is everyone so into it? People are into it because it's basically improv class with nerd stuff and geek stuff. So it's you're telling a story. You just get characters. You have to develop your own character. You can name it. All these games have source books, which are just basically the Bible of the story, and you can transform your character. You can do whatever you want. And so I created a character that I loved and wrote fan fiction for, and wrote fan fiction that was slash fiction with masquerade characters and Interview with a Vampire. So like I was so entrenched into masquerade as a game to play that's like vampire D&D, but I was so into Anne Rice's books. I read every interview. Again, no internet. So you would go to the public library. And luckily my mom was a research librarian. So I knew how to do all this stuff. I knew the Dewey Decimal System memorized before I knew most things. And I knew, oh, you can find thing on microfiche, which was like kind of like, think of it as unplugged Wikipedia. That's what that is. It's basically like, it's on microfiche. You have like, if you watch like, oh, I don't know, movies that take place in the 70s and 80s, even X-Files, I think, has a bit of this. You just go to the
Yeah, they
public
use
library.
microfiche.
You can find any magazine, any article. And I was reading every interview I could with Anne Rice. And I remember her saying how much research she does when she writes books. And yes, this is fiction. You don't have to tell me in the comments that I'm not delusional. I know this is fiction, but a lot of stuff in Interview with Vampire and Vampire Lestat are based off of historical things that really did happen. Wars, obviously, famines, plagues, but also certain things that happen in New Orleans. The Theater de los Vampires is real. It was a real thing, a real troupe that did vampire stories. There were rumors that maybe they were vampires, maybe not. They let those rumors happen because they're showmen. So of course you're going to say, I'm not going to say we're not vampires if it's going to affect ticket sales. And their theater did get burned down. It's historic. It's a historical fact. So when I would read these little tidbits that were true, especially something like that, I was like, oh, well, then how much is this true? Is Interview with the Vampire so meta that this actually was a real life story of a vampire, but she makes it into sounding like it's a fictionalized thing of a journalist interviewing a vampire? Did this really happen? So there was so much lore and so many conspiracy, and this is pre-Reddit, pre-internet, right? So this is just, I would meet people in line to get books signed by her, where I would be sad the line would move fast, because I was like, I want to talk to all these fans who are like, you don't understand, I did this research, or I went to San Francisco and I went to all the places, or I went to New Orleans and I went to all the places that are mentioned, and they really do exist. And, you know, everything she mentions really does exist. And I'm like, I know. And so we would be convinced that there was a kernel of truth to it. That's how good a writer she is. That's how good a world builder she is. So when this movie, back to the movie. So when this movie was cast, I was so happy with the director. Neil Jordan's great. The Crying Game, I believe, predates this, I think.
Yes,
and it was,
I believe, 92.
you know, that won Oscar. I mean, that won a lot of awards.
It's an Oscar for it, yeah.
Yeah, and also this movie is beautifully shot, and it's so historically accurate with how San Francisco, that first shot when they're going through San Francisco and it's downtown. I lived in San Francisco for 23 years, so I know exactly where that is. I remember when I first moved to San Francisco, I went to the building, I went upstairs, I tried to find the room where the interview was supposed to take place according to the book, but also from the trailer. I was like, well, I'm going to scope it out. But that's how much I was into this. I wanted this movie to be so good, but the one thing that held me back, and it was only one thing, and it was Tom Cruise. And I'm like, I can't. I fell in love with Lestat's a jerk. He's an asshole. In the book, he is a narcissist. He doesn't learn things. He just runs through life, creating chaos and havoc, making people vampires willy-nilly, doesn't pay attention. There are rules in this world that you're supposed to abide by that he just ignores. Lestat just is like, he does whatever he wants. And
so this is Lestat in the book, according to you.
This is how he is in the book, but this is also how he is in the movie. This is how he is in the TV show. Like, Lestat's always going to be a narcissist jerk. I mean, he in the Vampire Lestat book, which is the second one, he becomes a rock star. The rule number one of being a vampire is do not have a public face. Do not become famous, because people are going to start asking questions when you don't age 200 years later. So you can't be doing that. There's tricks, right? You say, oh, I'm this. He was my grandfather. I just look a lot like him. Like, there's these rules that you're supposed to do, so you don't get killed, right? Because the minute people think you're a vampire for real, they either pester you to death to become a vampire because they want immortality, or they kill you. So it's like, you kind of got to play it safe, and he never does. So I don't know why Tom Cruise was cast. I know he really wanted this character. This was something he wanted to do. He's a good actor. I like him in other stuff. I put the Scientology stuff aside because, let's be honest, when you love actors, there's going to be plenty. There's going to be a handful that are horrible in real life or just do questionable things in real life, and you have to separate art from person. And maybe you don't. Maybe you don't draw on the line. But I love his Mission Impossible movies. I love his Jack Reacher movies. I love his action movies. I love Legend. He is in one of the most beautiful. That is a great fantasy
Yes.
film. It's got Tim Curry as the devil. It's got Mia Sarah, who of course is the girlfriend in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. She's in it. She
Yes.
plays this beautiful. It's got a Tangerine Dream soundtrack. I love the movie Legend, and he plays a really cool fantasy character as a young Tom Cruise. So he has depth. He's Vanilla Sky's great. Like he's just such a good. He does comedy.
So
And I just didn't want him playing a vampire. Like I was just like, please don't. Please
that's
leave this
really
alone.
it? Is it
Please.
too dark for him? Like, do you just think, like, you don't believe that he has that depth, or is it just, like,
He's
his
not.
face is too rounded, his features are not European enough? Like, could you I
I
feel
would
like that's
say all
for
of
me
that.
what I
All
would
of that. I would
say.
say he's not European looking or Norwegian. I would say enough or Viking
Uh-huh.
esque enough. Like the actor that played. Oh, I'm gonna forget his name, but he played a vampire in True Blood, and he's the Viking vampire guy. He would have been
Oh,
great, but
the
of course he was. But he's probably like 5 when this movie was like, you know what I mean? Like all the actors now,
yeah, I
I've
believe
got a
that's a
long list.
Skarsgård.
Yeah. Oh my, any of the Skarsgårds, just pick a Skarsgård, and I'm sure it would have been a fine. Even the oldest Skarsgård would have been better than Tom Cruise.
So how
So
do you
I
think
just
about the casting in the television series where they've gone completely in a different direction?
That's apples and oranges. So the way I kind of treat
Okay.
things now, also I'm older now. Also
Yeah.
I've worked for major franchises. So I understand how fandom works from the inside out, but I also understand it from the business side. And I understand it from the, hey, let's do some different kinds of representation side, right? It doesn't always have to be
Mhm.
white guys. And it doesn't have to be straight white guys. That's another thing with this book that you have to remember. It came out in this, I think, late 70s, early 80s. The whole series, I think Queen of the Damned came out. I think that Queen of the Damned was kind of the last of the Lestat. I think it was the last of the Lestat trilogy that came out in like
Yes.
90 something. But during this time, during this era, there weren't a lot of homoerotica things,
Mhm.
right? So it was an era of the AIDS epidemic. So during the 90s,
Mhm.
AIDS had taken over everyone. It was like I don't want to call it the COVID of the 90s because it was not the same kind of thing. It was sexually transmitted or through blood transfusions or through sharing needles. So it wasn't a gay disease, but the media made it out to be a gay disease in the beginning. That's why it didn't get taken seriously or didn't get funding
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
homophobia was rampant. But this was an era where you were not going to see big time actors, dudes, 2 straight dudes smooching. You were not going to see that. So the fact that this movie even got made during the 90s, which was, Y2K era, oh, it's not even Y2K era. It was just like an era where you just
Pre-Y2K,
didn't see
yeah.
gay stuff. You didn't see gay stuff. Like you would see some lesbian stuff, but that's always been like more of a straight dude's
So
vision of lesbian, not lesbian. So you
yeah.
have 2 characters and also the blood, the very act of biting on the neck or whatever is very sexual. I mean,
Yeah.
that's well documented all the way back to Dracula and Nosferatu and Polgery's vampire story. It's always swap out blood for semen or whatever, right? Or
Mhm.
it's always going to be sexual. And what Penny Dreadfuls were always sexual. That's why they sold so well
Mhm.
during that time period in the Victorian era because everyone's so sexually, restrained that they have some outlet. That was their Hustler magazine. That was their porn. That was their OnlyFans, right? Is that. So this was an era where I was like, holy crap, we're going to see major actors kissing. It's dudes. Like they're what? So I think that was huge for the gay community. That was huge for any community, to be honest, because it's like,
Yes,
oh,
so let
cool.
me just throw something out there, like, if this had been cast as a Rutger Hauer or an actual European actor, I think what
Yeah.
you would have had happen was exactly what would have happened with Philadelphia. Philadelphia, same exact time period,
Yeah.
supposed to be Daniel Day-Lewis, they cast Tom
Yep.
Hanks because they want the American people to see someone that they normally think of as like, "Oh, he's a
Straight.
sweetheart, he's a"
Yeah.
straight, very American, doing something and saying to them like, "Hey, this is nuanced. These are characters, these are people.
Yeah.
I, as this straight man you respect, am not afraid to play this character." And so for that
Mhm.
bit, I kind of feel like, okay, I get Tom
Yeah,
Cruise.
I mean, kudos to
Really?
them because now that I'm older, I look back on it, I'm like, God, I was such a whiny brat about it when I should have been respectful of the fact that this was groundbreaking. This is history being made for the gay community,
Mhm. Mhm.
for filmmaking, for casting, but also it's a business. And in the 90s, independent film was having some troubles. Miramax, kind of, I would say
Oof.
Tarantino, probably Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez. and Spike Lee, they probably, and you know, a handful of female directors as well, were kind of saving the film industry from ruin, because it was just either these massive blockbusters like Batman kind of things, right, where you just put so much money behind it, or it's these tiny little films that just weren't getting any distribution. And also, this is an era before streaming. This is an era for VHS, though. So a lot of people are waiting. They're not going to theaters. They're waiting till it comes out on VHS, and they'll go to Blockbuster and they'll rent it, right? Or they'll wait till it drops on HBO or Showtime, because back then that's how you saw major movies after they were done with their theatrical run. So a lot of people were, you know, so the movie theater business was not doing well. So this was the first time too where it's a major budget, a major film studio, a big time director behind it who's already won an Oscar. You need to have actors that are going to put butts in seats. And I think when you think of it like that, especially at a time period where it was like you had to have names attached to films before even you would get a budget, right? So you had to say, oh, I have Tom. If you said you had Tom Cruise at this time period, you probably would have been like, oh, we'll give you an endless budget. That's what you want. And that's why this movie's so beautifully shot. That's why the costumes are beautiful. The music's beautiful. It's cinematic. It's like a Gone with the Wind with vampires. Like, it is very beautiful.
60 million in this. That's a lot.
Right.
A lot.
But now
Dusk Till Dawn is the same time period, and it's 19 million. So like, keep that in mind, which is a small budget.
Yeah, and this is before people were throwing down money for vampire movies. Also, keep in mind, horror films will always be treated like the bastard stepchildren kept in the basement away from the. They're the Harry Potters in the closet, right? They never get respect. We rarely, and I'm making it about me now. We rarely get Oscars. We rarely get accolades. It's also, horror is the forefront of social issues. It's the first to bring up everything that mainstream is afraid to. And it's
once
also
you add social into it, it becomes a thriller. It's not even a horror anymore. No. It's a psychological drama. Don't call it that horror.
And also in the 90s, you know, you're coming off of the 80s horror slasher films and like Freddy Krueger and stuff. And, you know, Scream kind of like reinvented horror in the 90s as well. So that was much later. So it's like, you know, the fact that this movie got made and the budget that it got made, with the casting it got made, with the act. I mean, I'm looking back at it now.
Got to work on the script at all.
That Anne even got to touch it. Because, I mean, again, you have to remember, development hell for what, 10, 15 years? The fact, and also she hated the idea of Tom Cruise playing this character too. I was not alone. She fucking hated it. She went on record saying she hated it. She refused to watch the movie. And then finally, when she watched it, I think a friend made her or something. She's like, oh crap, Tom Cruise is actually pretty good. I like him in it. I'm going to write it. I'm going to write a very long, I think she wrote, like, she recorded herself apologizing to him. And then she went and did a 2-minute recording about how much she loved him in this role. And then they ended up using it in the value added section of the DVD and VHS before DVD, because DVD didn't exist yet. So it's VHS.
Kudos to her for being able to say that and being able to be willing to go back on that. Like,
and I, you know, and this, and also when you know the background of this, because this book is so, you know, it cemented her as the, and I don't want to call her the Stephen King of writers, because she's in her own right? She's the Anne Rice of writers. Anne Rice is, and I got a tattoo on my back of a fallen angel because of a speech that Lestat gives in one of the books. And I, you know, like her, I wanted to be her. Like, I wanted to be a writer because of her.
A lot of people did. Yeah.
And she influenced me so much on everything. And, you know, it was such an important story for her because, as you know, Claudia, the child vampire, you know, is a representation call out of the daughter that she lost, who died, you know, that at a young age. And she wanted to immortalize her own daughter who passed away in a certain character. And it became this iconic character that even today you see repeated, like in Let the Right One In, right? With child vampire characters. It's horrifying because you have these people that are like, you know, 200 years old, 300, 2000, whatever, and they're trapped in a child's body, but they're sexual, they're intellectual. Like, what do you do with that? So that was groundbreaking.
What did you think of the scene, that particular scene? I mean, Kirsten Dunst is the only person in this who gets any kind of accolades. She gets a Golden Globe nomination. This is her first feature role. She's 11. Could she even watch this movie?
Well, no, I mean, eventually she did, right, as an adult. But
Yeah,
when the
but
movie
when it
came
comes
out,
out, it's like the piano, like, could the kid in the piano watch the piano?
I think she went to the red carpet premiere, but then she got kind of scooted off. It's kind of like what I do when I go to rides at Disney World and Disneyland because I have a bad back, and also I just I don't like roller coasters, but I like the set dressing of certain rides. So Tower of Terror, which is based on like a Twilight Zone.
Mhm.
I would go all the way through it. Like I'd be the idiot that'd be like stand in line for 2 hours because you get to see all the set dressing. But they do this with all roller coaster rides. I'm just gonna tell you this right now. It right up until you get on the roller coaster,
You could
there's an exit path. So they'll be like, oh, if you don't
yes.
want on, just follow that, and it goes straight to like the gift shop or whatever. And I
Yeah.
kept thinking, yeah, what they did with her, right? She'll go to the premiere, but her parents, because she was 12, her parents are like, yeah, this is a little R-rated, a little too R-rated for you. Even though she's in the freaking movie and they talk about sexual things, they're like, nah, I mean,
Mm.
okay, I'm not going to argue. I'm not a parent, but at the same time, I'm like, okay, that's kind of, you let her be in the movie. She knows what it's about. Like, not letting her see it was kind of weird, but
She
I don't
knew
know.
enough to do a good job acting the character's motivation. I think she
She,
knows what was going
I think
on.
and she's done so many roles, and she's such a,
Mhm.
again, she's a chameleon actress who's been in so many things,
Mm.
and kind of a darling before she was a darling at that time, right? Because it's like before she came
Yeah.
into her own as a Sophia Coppola muse, as the
Mhm.
90s it girl. Not the
Mhm.
Brat Pack because that was 80s, but like the next wave,
Yeah.
right? And
And, like, what an acting challenge to have to be 11. You have no depth of acting really besides commercials, and I think she was in Bonfire of the
well,
Vanities on TV,
I
to
do
then
think
play,
that
like, a
some
multi-hundred-year-old character, like, that's a lot, and she does it
yeah,
well.
but I will say as a kid that loved acting, even though I can't memorize anything, I'm dyslexic and I also have a short attention span. So I couldn't memorize stuff, but I'm good at ad-libbing. So any kind of school play, I'd be up there. I would say my first 5 lines, forget the rest and make up the rest. So I was a horrible actor, but I loved the process. I loved the acting. I love play
Yeah.
acting. I love pretending. I think children are natural born actors. It just let them go, right? It's just the memorization and having to be around adults that aren't so great. That's the tough part. The rejection of auditions, I could have never done that. Like I could
Mhm.
barely get through ballet class and deal with all that nightmare. I don't think I could be a professional actor at that age. You have to be really thick skinned, tough, not let anything get to you, and have good parents too. I think good management.
Yeah.
But the thing with her, she played this role so beautifully, and also her character in the movie is much a bit older than in the book. In the book, she's a lot younger.
Mhm,
Claudia's younger
mhm.
than
I
12.
think that's just
I think
necessary,
she's
like, the
like
audience
6.
wouldn't handle it if it was a little
Well,
younger.
it's hard to get a 6-year-old to do some of those things. So I
Oh,
think
no, it might as well be a dog at that point. As a
I
director,
mean,
when you put kids and pets on set, it's like, "Oh
well,
god, this is
that's
gonna
they
be 2
always say never
days."
work. They always say never work with animals or children. But as someone who's been
Yeah.
on many movie sets, I would say, oh no, they're not the problem. It's the dudes that are in method acting that refuse to be human when the clap stops, right? Like that. I'm gonna name drop real quick because this is a fun story. When I worked at Lucasfilm, I
Yes.
got to talk to Christopher
Yes.
Lee. I got to talk to Christopher Lee. He's iconic actor, British actor of stage
Mhm.
and screen, Shakespearean trained, which I think is important to remember. He would memorize not just his lines, he'd memorize the whole entire script and the notes and the footnotes and know the lighting. I mean, in that era that he was an actor, when you look at like actresses like Betty Davis and Joan Crawford and all, they made friends with the lighting guys because they knew that it's more
Yeah.
than just memorizing lines. And also you have to be gracious to your who you're acting
Mhm.
with. You can't just be the star. You have to listen, you have to react, you don't just have your stand in there, you be there. So I remember like talking to him about acting, and he's like, yeah, that's changed, quite a bit. Cause I asked him about what it was like to act with Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen. And
Mhm.
Hayden was a very new actor. He'd only done some Canadian TV stuff. Good actor, but not a range, and Natalie had done a bunch of stuff before because she was a theater kid and obviously the professional and
Mhm.
things like that.
Mhm.
But Ewan is a method actor, so he likes to stay in character. So when he's Obi-Wan, he's Obi-Wan. You don't get Ewan. I don't think I've ever met Ewan. I
Oh.
met Ewan McGregor once, but I knew Obi-Wan a lot. So I was like, you don't, and Jared Leto's like that too. They stay in character. But that's really aggravating for actors like Christopher Lee, who are like, no, no, no. And by the way, this is not how he talks. He does not talk like me. Imagine like a very regal king royal British accent And
Yes,
him
yes, yes, yes.
explaining to nerdy me as I'm like, tell me more, because of course I was in love with him since the Hammer films when he played Dracula. Um, he he was like, for me, acting is it's acting, it's a job. I'm playing a role, I memorize it, I do what the director wants. Um, I'm not there to rewrite a script. I'm not there to talk about what's my character's motivation. I don't think he said he never said those words. He's there to play a role. But you have younger actors who want a whole Bible about themselves. They want to ad lib, and they want to do many, many, many takes. Keanu Reeves is infamous for, I shouldn't say infamous because he's very kind, but he's the kind of guy who wants a zillion takes. Benedict Cumberbatch wants a zillion takes because they're
Mhm.
worried they're not giving the director what they want. And if it's not a very emotive director, like George Lucas is a brilliant world builder, a brilliant editor, a brilliant putting things together. But one-on-one with actors, he's not so great. And so, if you have very needy actors that need more input, he's not that guy. Spielberg's great because Spielberg's great with kids.
Mhm.
Drew Barrymore
Mhm.
talks glowingly about it. I mean, like he's like the kid, he's the people person. He's still an introvert, but he's a people person. George is a genius, but not people-y. He's not like,
Got
oh,
enough
I'm
bedside manner.
yeah, he's not going to bond with the actors. He knows what he's doing, knows what he's envisioning, and he hopes that they will do it. But like he's not, like Carrie always saying, people don't talk like this. Why are you having us talk like this? There's no one on earth talks like. But Carrie had a thick skin because she was a child actor and she has a sense of humor about it. Mark was invested fully into the story. Like he probably got it and understood it more than anyone on set, besides
Mhm.
George. And Harrison's, he was a character actor forever. He was a studio person, part of the studio regime of when you sign on as an actor, you sign with the studio and then you do a bunch of studio movies. It's not like you're a free agent. Free agent acting didn't happen until later. So you have all these different types of acting, right? And I just remember Christopher Lee saying, yeah, these new, a lot of the younger actors really want to do method acting, want to become the character, want to embody the character. And I don't think I don't know if Tom Cruise is method or if he just thinks he's the guy from Mission Impossible because he does his own stunts and he is a daredevil. So I think at this point he just thinks he's that guy. Like I don't think he realized Mission Impossible is fiction anymore. Like, and maybe it's not because he does do. So I do wonder during the production of this film how much he was like, "Oh, I'm a vampire. I'm just a vampire now." Like I do wonder because
Did he
Brad
ever
Pitt.
take the fake teeth out, or did he just live
Yeah,
with
because
them the whole time?
Brad Pitt's not like that. The other actors in this film are not like that. I would say on different
Yeah.
levels, because you do have a lot of first timers in this movie that go on to be
Mhm.
major actors.
Mhm.
Like Antonio Banderas had been doing movies before this, clearly, right? Because he was
Mhm.
doing
Mhm.
stuff with Rodriguez and
What do you
also
think of his scene that he was in, that
I loved
particular
him
we
as
had kind
Armand.
of talked about it a little bit earlier, yeah.
Yeah, like his character is much more fleshed out in the book. You learn
Mhm.
he's much more of a bigger character. And that's another problem with book to screen is that, especially I think Game of Thrones fans and Lord of the Rings fans would agree with me on this. The books are freaking
Mhm.
huge. And also Stephen King books like It, right? Like, or The Stand.
Mhm.
They're huge, huge, huge. A Dark Tower. They're huge books. There's no way it's going to translate where everyone gets what they want on film because there's just too much. There's too many characters. There's too many settings. There's too many locations. It'd be expensive as hell. So you kind of have to be okay. You have to be okay as a fan of a book series with what you get, right? And hopefully it'll keep getting rebooted in different ways, like Interview with the Vampire is a TV series that's getting
Mhm.
fleshed out much more
Mhm.
than the movie series was, or the
Do you feel
movie
like the
trilogy was.
movie was at least different? I mean, at least good. I know that, we're talking
Oh yeah,
about
no,
Dark
it was.
Towers, which is horrifically not accurate at all, so
Well,
forgive
Dark
me.
Tower is its own problem. That has its own problems because that
Yeah.
was just getting rewritten, and also poor Stephen King.
Bless.
You know what? I love
Bless.
so much of his movies. I love the original Carrie. I love The Shining. The Shining to me is an art film. It's not really a horror
Mhm.
film. To me, it's like art. But
Mm,
it's so
mhm.
beautiful, so crisp,
It's
so
a
like
descent
gorgeous.
into madness film. Yeah,
Oh,
it's
I
very
love it. But
beautiful.
also, I love all of his adaptations of his book to movie. Thinner is great. Like, I love
Oh,
all the
yeah.
Stephen King stuff.
Oh,
But
Thinner is really good.
he had like now he's smart. I mean, now he gets it, right? Like many, many, many years. I mean, and still
Mhm.
making things. He's still on TV shows that he's working on.
Yeah.
I mean, the man never stops. I hope he's immortal. I don't like him. Like, I just don't want, I'm just not going to manifest any of that because it's been a rough couple of weeks for the
Mhm.
world. So I don't want to like put that in the sphere, but you think about these things, but to get back to the acting thing, like I think with children, they understand the difference between real and not real, right? But
Mhm.
with Kirsten Dunst, she brought something to this role that felt very unique because Claudia is a great character, and Claudia is interesting, right? Because you see her as a child and she's being saved. I mean, to be to
Mhm.
be clear, he does say it because her mom dies in the plague, right? And Lestat. And when I think about it now in a different lens, because I'm like, oh, this is two dads. This is two dads. Like he's trying to save their relationship by bringing a child into it. Gay marriage was not legal. I was just kept thinking, but I mean, murdering someone and bringing them back to life to be your kid is also not legal. But it was like, oh, it's kind of sweet because they
So
were
it could have been Tom Selleck cast because it's
no,
almost
no,
two
no,
men
not.
and a little
I mean, oh
baby.
my god, could you imagine? Mustache vampires are hilarious. No, yeah, Magnum
Yeah,
PI the vampire. I'm down. I'm down. Let's manifest that. Let's write that. No,
yeah.
I love the idea of let's save a relationship. Like I've been in many
Yeah,
relationships that we try to save them with pets, right? Like,
yeah,
oh,
of
I guess he's
course.
yeah, I get it. And people try to save their marriages with kids all the time. So it was interesting in a way that you have
I
this
love that.
relationship. It's not a buddy cop movie. They're romantically involved and they're not seeing eye to eye on how to be a vampire. And Louis is very much like, Angel of Buffy the Vampire, where he's like, I'm just going to drink animal blood or figure it out, but not kill people because Louis doesn't want to kill anyone. And Lestat's like, that's the best part. Like, what do you, you know what I mean? Like, you signed up to be a
Yeah.
vampire. So you got to do the vampire stuff. You can't just be like, emo and just stand over there in the corner. And yeah, you don't get to turn into a bat. That's sad. I mean, I wish it was more like What We Do in the Shadows, because that's my level of vampirism. That's how I want to be a vampire. I want to be Nadja, and that I'm done. Like, I'd be happy. But with this world building and these rules for vampirism, which is great because they do talk about this in the movie, where he's like, he's being interviewed by a journalist, and a good journalist is going to ask them tropey things about vampirism because he's like, oh shit, this is a real vampire. I got questions. And I always thought, when do I get to be, because I was a journalist at the time. I was like, I had a lot more questions than Mallory did. Like, I was just like, okay, you just stopped there. Like, I know he's got to tell you his story and all, but if I had met a real vampire and he proved it to me, I'd be like, okay, this is a 10-part podcast series. I am going to be interviewing about so many things, like just not the basic shit. Like, I'm going to ask you about, okay, what are all the foods you can't eat, but you can eat if you want to eat for pleasure, but how does your digestive system work? Like, can you get diseases? Can you do you have body odor? Like, how does this, do you have to pretend to breathe? Like, how is this? It's
Can
so
you
many
eat
questions.
onions because they're, like, taxonomically close to garlic, but, like, how
But
is it just
also,
get our
like,
hives when you do
the
that?
the garlic doesn't matter. So in this world, and also every vampire world has their own lore of how to
Yes.
kill
Mhm,
vampires or how to vampires, what do they react to? And in this
mhm.
one, crucifix don't really do anything. The sun will make you a crispy critter. So you kind of have to, like, you don't have to sleep in a coffin, but you can't be out in sunlight. And also you have to drink blood. That's kind of a
Yeah,
prerequisite. You
crucial.
can't just
Number 1.
yeah, you can't just drink cranberry juice. You can't just pretend. And also because your whole system's different, you're going to crave it, and you're probably going to crave fresh blood and not a blood bank and not animal blood, which is going to taste different, right? So and
Mhm.
rats, I mean, I guess if you're hungry enough, you do what you got to do, because Lestat, that's how he survived, right? But
Yeah.
there's all these things. And so when they make Claudia the vampire, that's great. I love her character. I love how smart she is. Also, I love how fed up she gets with the boys, and they bring this up in the book a lot more than they do in the movie, because she's exasperated as hell. Lestat's mom
Mhm.
is also Lestat's mom is one of the coolest vampires in this whole world, and you don't really get any of that like in the movies, but in the book series, it's like, holy shit, she's a cool, like, why didn't we just have the whole movies series about her? Because she's like
Yes,
this
yeah.
older woman who basically has cancer, and he loved his mom so much, he's like, I don't want her to die, so he makes her a vampire, not really consently. Like, of course, how do you give consent to be a vampire when you don't really think it's a thing? But she
Mhm.
becomes a vampire. She becomes like this really cool lady who goes traveling, and she like hangs out with artists and writers, and she changes history, and she becomes a warrior. But also, she's like she knows every language ever. She knows how to play the piano. She's amazing. She's like a Renaissance woman. I love her character, but she gets fed up with the son that she has, Lestat, right? So they're not hanging out a
Yeah,
lot.
oh my god,
That's
can you
another
imagine
thing,
that
like,
being your son? Ugh.
here's the thing, you kinda whoever you're sired by, right? Whoever becomes your, I don't wanna say dad or mom, but whoever makes you the vampire, you are connected to them. It is in their own best interest to teach you a few things. And unfortunately, like, the guy that made, how Lestat became a vampire, it was kind of like, well, good luck. Like, there wasn't a lot of like training. With Louis, Lestat was kind of like telling him stuff, but not like all the stuff. I think Armand was
Do you
probably like
feel
a
like
better
that could
teacher.
be an allegory for being gay at the time? Like, some people had no idea how to be gay, and some people got a gay boyfriend that kinda helped them, like,
That's
it
why
feels
there's
like
always yeah, and I think, and it's very different. Again, I don't want to speak for all gays, but I will say it's very contingent to where you live. Also, like, if it's you have to be in the closet to survive, not because you're
Mhm.
ashamed, but you might be murdered or whatever. Whoever's in charge of your country is who's in charge of the laws, right? Or in charge of the
You are
feeling.
seen as
I mean, we're gonna
other. Yeah.
Mhm. And then also, during this time, AIDS was a big a pandemic, like not
Yeah,
pandemic,
like
but
we
it
were
was,
saying,
so
yeah.
a lot of straight people were afraid of gay people, because they're like, oh, if I touch you, I'll get it. They didn't understand the dynamics of it. But also,
Mhm.
in the gay world, it, you're gay when you're born gay. There's no like turning people gay. So you're
So
gay. But
unlike vampirism, that isn't the way that that works.
right. But the problem with being gay, it's not a straight shot. That's a horrible phrase to talk about being gay. There's no like litmus test, right? There's no blood test. There's
Yeah,
no, oh, I
no.
licked this, it turned pink. I must be this, I'm a
How
lesbian.
much do you like Judy Garland, you know?
Right.
Like
Right. Because you can also be effeminate. There's also gender and sexuality are two different things. But in this time period,
absolutely.
it was blended, right? Like, we didn't call
Mhm.
trans people transgender, we call them transsexual. It's changed to transgender because it's not about sexuality, it's about gender identity, which now
Mhm.
kids today are very smart and very good and very on the ball about. And these things change. Our acronym has gotten longer, longer, longer. I'm bi, and even that's politically kind of wrought because a lot of lesbians don't think bi is a real thing. They think you're just,
Oh,
passing. They think you're passing. Gay men, they treat bisexual women different than bisexual men. Sometimes they don't even care. And then straight people just think you're slutty or that you just are for threesomes. And poly is not, and threesomes and poly are not the same. And also, there's things like, pansexual, which isn't about gender. It's not
yeah,
about male or
exactly.
female.
It's
And that's what I am. But technically, I'm lazy sexual because I don't do anything because I kind of just gave up. So, like, just, but I'm
and then
not
there's even
ace,
still asexual, like, there's
right?
the
I'm not
option to
ace.
be ace,
Ace is
yeah.
asexual, and that has been hard for people to really explain, right? Because it's not an
No,
easy
I
thing
think
to explain. So I
BoJack
just say it's a
Horseman does a
spectrum.
really good job of introducing an ace character and kind of talking about that for people who are
Yeah.
listening and looking for a good ace story.
See,
I think
this
that's
is,
really wonderful.
what was it called again? I'm sorry, I talked over you.
BoJack Horseman
Oh
in the
yeah,
later
yeah, of course.
series has an ace
Yeah,
character.
yeah.
You find out, yeah, I think
And
that's
then
really
also you
great.
have non-binary, which is gender, not
Mhm,
sexual. But
mhm.
here's the thing: this was a simpler time in the '90s when there
It
weren't.
was the '90s.
It was the '90s where it was funny because a lot of I was also in college in an era where a lot of people were experimenting, and I think sometimes they used to call it gay till graduation, and it was like that
Yes.
was a thing. And
I went to
hey, I
Smith,
don't.
we had, slugs,
Yeah,
Smith lesbians until
the Sloans,
graduation,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, the brown, yeah, all of that. So for
all
me,
that.
I was pretty out, but also because I was in the punk scene and the raver scene and the club kid and goth scene, that was predominantly, I wouldn't say predominantly, but it was very open to
Mhm.
sexuality being not
Yeah.
what you would think and whatever's considered normal. So for for gay culture, especially for men, and if you live in an area where, let's like if you live in, like Trixie Mattel talks about this, a really famous drag queen,
Yes,
where
yes,
she's
I
like,
love
yeah,
Trixie.
she lived on the res for a while because she's part, Native American, but also she lived in a rural area, but also there weren't gay bars. I think there's one gay bar and it was like kind of a secret, right? And
Mhm.
if you think you're gay, but you don't have representation, so you don't have movies or TV, you don't have books, you don't know where to go. There's no class you can take on how to be gay, right? So just like there's no class on how to be punk, how to be goth, that's a different because
How
that's
to be a
more
vampire.
right, how to be a vampire. but the gay thing, you are internally gay. So it's not something you just chose, like, I'm going to be a nurse, I'm going to take a class. No, this is who you are. But you aren't like, it's not like where it's race, right? Where you were born into it, or it's visible. You're like, I know that other person is my color. When you're gay, you don't have that identifier, and people can be effeminate, people can be masculine. So you don't know. There's no, like, people always say gaydar, but gaydar doesn't work anymore, because everyone's either really good at masking, or sometimes they just are more feminine or masculine, or maybe nothing. Like, maybe they're in the middle, maybe they choose not to be either. So with vampirism, it was a good parallel, because if you become a vampire and you're the dude, whoever made you a vampire leaves and doesn't give you instructions, I wonder how many vampires, probably if they did exist in real life, probably a lot of them died because they didn't know certain things, or they thought certain things would affect them that wouldn't, right? Like religious icon, you could walk into a church and not just instantly combust. And it just depends, because every culture has different rules for their vampire history. So like I said earlier, I was obsessed with this book series. I wanted to be a vampirologist. I kid you not. I looked into it when I was in high school. There wasn't anything. There was an interview. There was a vampire society that I joined. It was Vampire Research Society, VRS. I was the youngest member. Thank you very much. But it was all these intellects, right? It was all these intellectuals, probably retired beatniks, that all read Anne Rice books. And they wanted to create the Talamasca, which was the big paranormal, occult, library, historians, academics. And to some level, psychologists.
Before we
Oh my
move away
God,
from the
I've been
grooming
talking way
concept,
too much. I'm so sorry.
it's
Let's
okay.
talk about the movie. Let's talk about the movie. I'm so sorry. It's weird too, because the lore is so huge with this book. That's why it's like so hard to like talk about this movie, because they did cover it, and places I was surprised they covered things. Because like I said, I didn't watch the movie purposely, because I was like, it's not gonna be as good as the book. I don't want to watch it. And it was, Tom Cruise aside, it was really, really close to the book and really good.
So, with the grooming, do you feel like Lestat's character in the book and even in the movie, do you feel like they are grooming each other, or do you feel like there's a genuine, like, want for someone to spend
Companionship.
time with? This is such a lonely thing to have to be given to you, like you said, like,
You know what?
you know.
It's interesting that Louis, the character of Louis, when you meet him, he's talking about his life in New Orleans. He's a plantation owner. So this is someone who owns slaves. So put that in your back pocket. Vampires, when they sire people, those people are attached to them for as long as they exist as vampires. Now, different world building has different rules. I think Lost Boys and others. I even think like some others, like if your sire, whoever makes you a vampire dies, then you die with them.
You die too,
That's right. But with this, I don't think is that the case here? I don't think it is. I think it's sort of it. Like, it is sort of with Queen of the Damned, because she is the Egyptian queen that created. It depends on like what your vampire lore is, right? But that's Anne Rice's with Queen of the Damned. And I highly recommend reading that book. And you don't have to read these in order, by the way. You can read Queen of the Damned first if you want, because it's all the vampires. Yeah, Queen of the Damned is all. Nice. It's not just Lestat's in there for sure, because he's a rock star at this point, and the queen is like, what the hell? What's going on with that guy? And also, she's been in slumber forever, so she doesn't even know all the vampire-y stuff that happened. But I think when you, in this book series, in this movie, world building, the way Anne Rice did it is, whoever makes you a vampire, you're kind of tied to them for life, right? You're tied to them because they have to teach you everything. And if they just bail on you, or if they die before they can do that, you're on your own. You don't know, unless it's like modern day times. And keep in mind, Louis was not made a vampire in modern day. Lestat sure as hell wasn't. Claudia wasn't. So you don't have this lexicon of, oh yeah, you're a vampire. Here's some vampire rules. Like, you just don't have that in your
Here's
the
manual.
Also,
right.
Also, it's not supposed to exist. Like, and also in that time, in that era, there was Dracula, the book, sure, but there wasn't, like, you know what I mean? Like, people just thought of it like ghost stories. They didn't think it was real. So, what do you do? Like, the only thing I could bring it into relevancy now would be like if an alien showed up and did something to you to make you immortal, but you had to follow alien rules, but then he died before he could tell you what the alien rules were. What would you do? Because there's no, like, alien guidebook about your type of alien. So how
Well, I
would you
mean,
know how to survive?
could you even love that alien? I mean, maybe they were once human and now they're alien, but they've done this thing to you, and it's so I don't know if I could truly love that, or if it's such a power
Yeah.
dynamic
And also
that
it
you're
depends on
not.
consent. It depends on consent because Louis did not give consent to become a vampire. Uh,
Nor did, Kirsten Dunst's character either. There's a
yeah.
lot of lack of consent in this movie.
And that's an interesting to think about too, because your life is completely being changed. And there's great tropes in vampire fiction of people that fall in love with vampires who are like, I don't want to be a vampire. Like even I just rewatched that episode
Mhm.
of What We Do in the Shadows where one of the main characters,
Gilmore.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was like, and also she accidentally became a werewolf by cheating on him with the werewolf, which is pretty hilarious. But she didn't want to be a vampire. She's like, she was stringing him along for 40 years, which I loved. Because she's like, I like him,
Yeah.
I'll have sex with him. And she's like, he's an acquired taste. Like I like being around him a lot. And then I get sick of him and I leave. And then I'll leave for a decade and then come back. But he always wants to turn her into a vampire. And she's like, nah, it's not really for me, which I love because of course with Twilight, with Buffy, with Vampire Diaries, there's so many vampire like things with teens who are all like, oh, like with Twilight, especially,
Yeah.
oh, I would love to be a vampire. Those are the cool kids. But like, but what, and I talked to you this before we started filming, where I'm so over humans right now that I was thinking, and I'm a human,
Mhm.
by the way. I mean, full disclosure, I'm not a vampire. I'm not immortal. And I was thinking, God, I would get so sick. Like I would have to do the thing in the Anne Rice books where they highly recommend you go into hibernation for a few
For
decades.
for a
So when you
while.
go, because you have to, or else you'll go completely crazy. That's why
Mhm.
Lestat is Lestat because he didn't do that, and then I think he was forced to do that, and then his human handler sort of just died off and forgot about. So he was forgotten about. By the way, he was just like kind of left. His coffin was just left
Ugh.
somewhere underground. And then when you get, and it happened to Louis, it happened to all of them. So except for Claudia and such, but like there's certain, you kind of have to sleep for a while so you can recharge your brain, or else you're just going to want to kill all like you're just going to wipe out humanity, which you can't do because that's your food source. So you really
Yep.
shouldn't. But at the same
Can't
time,
overfish.
I mean, I'm 53, 52, 53, and I see history repeated so often. Just this election's a good example, but just culturally, I see things going, like, for example, we used to call things that were kind of like, we would call them innocently racist, which is a horrible way to put it, but like politically correct,
Mhm.
right? Where people were like, no, you can't say that word. It's offensive. You can't do that. It's offensive. Now it's called woke, right? But
Mhm.
even woke is, you shouldn't be using that because it's appropriated from African American culture. So white people saying woke is kind of cringy too. But like I said PC the other day, and I work for Microsoft, and everyone in the meeting thought I meant personal computer and not politically correct. Because it's such old,
Wow.
because I said PC. I said, oh, that's not very PC. And they're like, what do you mean it's not about computers? I'm like, what do you mean it's computers? What are you talking about? Like, it was a good, like, generational confusion that happened in a video meeting, which was pretty hilarious when I think about it. But I was like, oh
Mhm.
crap. Like, I'm now so old that I'm bringing up things that I lived through, that people like. Y2K was not a fashion. It was a thing about computers, and we were worried planes were going to fall out of the sky because
Mhm.
no one who did coding thought to, I don't know, have a fail-safe about when we move to a different
It's so
millennia,
far in the future. That's
right?
somebody else's problem.
So, but it
That's
was like,
future Katie's problem.
but it was an era where we're like, well, we're all gonna die. I guess we're all gonna die because technology is gonna fail. And it didn't. Spoiler alert, we're fine. There was no planes falling out of the sky. It wasn't anything like that. But that's what we called Y2K. It wasn't about fashion or
Mhm.
music. It wasn't about
Mhm.
the era. Y2K was a computer reference. It was about the flipping of the zeros, the ones to the, because non-binary, it's binary, not non-binary, that's the other thing, but binary, which is computers are ones and zeros. And when
Computer,
you mess
yeah.
with that, right? So when you go from the 1900s to 2000, some computers are not going to understand and things are going to fail. Like, I don't know, banks, life support systems, things like that. But they didn't.
Just
We
little
figured it out.
crucial things.
We were
NBD.
fine. We were fine.
NBD.
But like, I think about that, and it's like when you are a vampire and you have to be prepared to be alive for so long. You're going to see humans messing up humanity over and over and over and over. You can
Mhm.
interfere on some level, but like vampire rules kind of say don't, because if you interfere, then you are famous or you're going to be on the radar, and you don't want to be on the radar because you're not aging. So people are going to figure it out, right? And eventually we're going to get in an era where it's Christians are in charge, and you don't want that because they actually believe in evil and they've got solutions for that, and that usually means killing you. I mean, just think about witchcraft. So I just thought about that, or I was like, I don't think I could survive because first I'm too much of a people person. So I'm raised Catholic / Christian, so I have guilt embedded in me so hardcore that I'd be like, I don't. But then I'd be like Dexter, and maybe I just kill people I think who deserve to be my food source because they're horrible people, right? Then I would become a vigilante, but then I'm sure I would make a mistake. Like, I just think of all the things that could go wrong. By the way, this is how my brain works. I've been thinking about this since I was like 8. I would love to be a vampire. And then I'm like, here's all the reasons why I would love it. But then I was like thinking, but I'm going to wear cats, wear dogs. I'm going to have a were rabbit. Like, I'm going to have a whole farm of were creatures because I don't really like humans, but I do like cats and dogs.
Well, you bring up a really interesting point, which is that, like, it isn't even like you're watching other humans. Once you become a vampire, this is your food source.
It's
you
your
don't want to
food.
kill off your food source.
But also
so
they
it's as if
smell
we
like
were trying to watch cows make decisions that are counterintuitive to their lifestyle.
I know.
So can you imagine, like, oh God, the fish are actually jumping out of the water into the land and killing themselves. I have to go put them back in the water because I need them to stay alive. But Jesus, they're so
I do
stupid.
wonder, like, if dogs and let's not talk about dogs and cats because we're not eating those. But let's say, what if chickens and fish and cows? What if everything that's in our pigs had personalities like humans, could talk like humans, had feelings, were intellectual? Would we be eating them? I do wonder that sometimes, like, because they don't talk, right? And also, we don't actually kill the food we eat. We get it at grocery stores or DoorDash.
Most people
right?
cannot
We're
kill the
so
food
separated.
they eat.
We're in it. We've
Most
been
people
in
can't
an
even
era.
butcher the food they eat if it's already dead.
That's another thing. When you become a vampire, you actually have to hunt. And you have to hunt. You have to go and hunt and kill. Yeah.
This is like the zombie debate about, like, oh, everybody wants to tell you what they would do in the zombie apocalypse, and you're listening to people who have no cardio tell you about what they're going to do.
Oh no,
and
I know what I would
if you
do.
can't even
I
kill
would
a
lean
vampire.
into it. Oh no, I'd lean into it. The zombie era, I 100%. I'm like, take me. I want to be a zombie because I don't want the stress.
Oh no, yeah.
Oh yeah. I don't want the stress.
You want to be dead. You just don't want them running. But people say that about, like, I want to be a vampire, and I'm like, you can't even deal it when your steak is a little bloody. What are you gonna do?
Though I will say, in her books and in the movie, I think they do it on some part. You are transformed where you do crave it, so it's no longer tastes like you don't taste blood and think pennies. You probably taste blood and are like, oh, this is like the best beer or cocktail I've ever had. It's like the best Starbucks, right? That's what blood becomes. So you can hate it. The reason we hate it as humans is for preservation of humans. Like that's why you shouldn't be eating humans. Like
you have to stop thinking of yourself as human in order to be able to drink the blood of a human, and then it starts to become like, well, then why not just kill them all? It's hard to care at all about their well-being or their society or their politics when you are immortal.
They become pets. They basically become pets you can drink off of, and you do see that snobbery happen in the movie and in the books. And I think in vampires, like Underworld's a perfect example where they're like, ugh, humans. Like it's just. And also Twilight. I mean, it's kind of funny because we always think of werewolves more like human friendly because they are human, except for certain times of the month, or which, to be honest, I'm like that too. But like, it's they're moon cycle creatures and they're still human and they're not immortal.
They're humanoid.
They just they're cryptids. So they human cryptids, Euryptids. I don't know what you call them. But where vampires, you still look like a human. Unless depending on if you're like, let yourself go. Like, obviously, if you're in slumber, you're not going to look right. You're not going to look human. And also, fascinating fact about this movie. All the actors playing vampires, they would hang them upside down during makeup time because they wanted because they wanted to paint the blood vessels on their, like, so when you hang upside down, all the blood rushes to your head, right?
Yeah.
And your blood vessels in your head kind of pop out a little bit, like the veins. And they wanted that look for when they were in vampire mode. So when they're in vampire mode, like they wear the contacts. Again, this is the 90s. So we don't have AI. We don't have CGI like it is now. they still had to do practical makeup effects, right? And so the fangs, they had to wear those. And you have to learn how to talk with fangs in. I don't even have. Ugh. Kudos to the guys.
Mhm.
Kudos to the actors who didn't sound like they had a weird lisp the whole time, like they do in
Yeah, they
Blade.
had a really good, custom it was the first time they've ever done this kind of custom
The custom kind,
dentistry.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So they had the makeup people had them hang upside down, and then they would paint the makeup on them as
Wow.
vampires because you have to be
Wow.
pale. You have to be like this. Like I've been doing vampire makeup
Wow.
since at birth because I'm just naturally pale and that's my look. But like they would hang them upside down. But I couldn't imagine like what if I kept thinking about this a lot because I did not know this fact until I did research on this for this podcast. I was like, okay, first of all, if you've ever hung upside down for longer than because they used to have those things at the gym where you can hang upside down and then you do like
Yeah,
sit-ups or whatever.
yeah.
I'm
Inversion
anemic.
table.
I'm anemic normally, so I might as well be a
Mhm.
vampire. I have 0 iron. Like I can't even give
Mhm.
blood. My anemic blood is just like they're like, no, no, no. It's like
Same. They don't
it's like,
take it.
yeah, I'm like the Diet Coke. Like I don't even think
They
vampires would
offer
want me.
you blood when they test you at most blood banks. Yeah, I'm that way
Yeah,
too. They're like, "You want
yeah.
a
So
pint
they're
on
like,
your way out?"
yeah, they don't want you because you're just gonna pass out. I pass out all the time. Like I have to remember to take iron or I'll pass out. So and I never go in the
Mhm,
sun. So I have to take vitamin
mhm.
D supplements. So again, I might as well be a vampire, but
Hmm,
I do.
hmm.
Here's the thing: when you hang upside down and you're already lightheaded, and if you're an actress in Hollywood, you're not eating anyway, so you're probably upside down. And if you're guys, you're probably smoking all the time, right, and not eating. So I could
Mhm, mhm.
definitely see Brad Pitt not eating. Um, but they're hanging him upside down and then doing the makeup, and then they push him out on stage and film. And I'm like, how did they not pass? How are they not passing out right and left? Like that's the fact that some makeup person thought, oh, well, we'll just do it this way. Like, what? How did they figure out to hang him upside down, first of all?
Hang me upside down, take a picture, and then do the makeup from that point on using the damn picture.
And I do wonder, because I do know a lot of makeup artists in Hollywood, I do wonder if they just weren't like, oh, this person is an asshole. Let's fuck with them. Let's just like say we're doing this now. Like, what? Because I have heard stories of certain actors in this film that are difficult to work with, who may have
Mm.
substance abuse problems and that makes them violent and horrible, or they're just mentally crazy. And I shouldn't use that lightly. They're, let's just say, very
Unstable.
enthusiastic in it's Cruise. Very enthusiastic in the role they're playing, right? Or their method, or their prima
Invested.
donnas. Who knows? Who knows, right? So I don't know the full tea on that. Like I wonder, wait a minute, was this just a makeup person like fucking with them? Or was it no, this was quicker to do it this way? Because they were sitting in the makeup chairs for a long amount of time to do all
Wow.
this vampire
Yeah.
makeup, right? Because vampire, when they
Question.
transform, it's very obvious. It's not
Mhm.
subtle.
Mm-mm.
So in the book, it's subtle. In the book, it's subtle. Unless they, like I said, unless they're in a coffin during their slumber for 200 years, and then they haven't eaten in 200 years, they're going to look crazy creepy. But if they're regularly getting blood, they just look like me. They just look like human. So
Yeah.
I shouldn't keep saying that. I'm not
No,
implying
no.
anything. But I do want, but yeah, so the way this movie's shot, the casting, I'm so glad they took it all over the place and not just
Yeah.
one
Do
locale so
you
you could see it.
do you have a
What did
favorite
and
scene?
I've been talking forever. What were some of the takeaways for you? Like were you a fan of this when you first saw it? Did you have any skin in the game? Were you like, I don't care who's cast, I'm just watching this? Was there anything?
Honestly, this is movies that came out in the mid-90s for me were things that I just saw on VHS because they were at Blockbuster, and so this movie came out, and I saw it when it came out because it was a movie, and I remember being like, "Yeah, it's a movie," and not really remembering I remember remembering how much I hated Kirsten Dunst's performance in the film, which is funny because
Really?
it's the only performance that gets any accolades. I remember being a sassy, like, 13-year-old and being like,
What a
fuck that
brat.
performance." I
Not
know,
you, her.
right?
Not you, not
Well,
you, not you, not
I
you. But I
think
get
that
it.
what I at the time I didn't understand and watching it now an adult is the character is intended to be that way, and that is the way that the actor is playing it versus I just don't like that character. When I was younger, I don't think I could delineate it from that kind of
Well, it is
information.
yeah, it's interesting because I do wonder how much Neil Jordan, as the director, right, gave her direction about her character because she is so fleshed out fully in the book. And again, I don't
Mhm.
recall if Kirsten said she read I don't think she read the books because they were very sexual.
That
So
would have been
her
a
parents
lot,
are not
yeah.
letting her, if her parents aren't letting her see her own performance, sure as
Mm,
hell are not letting her read those books because they are very, very sexual.
no.
They're not like True Blood sexual. I mean, the True Blood parody porn has less porn than True Blood. So like that's so True Blood's a whole
That
other
says a
thing.
lot.
But and
That
that's a
says
book
a
series.
lot.
That's that is based on a book series. But
But
you
yeah,
know,
I do remember being like, "This is really beautifully shot." If anything stuck with me, it
yeah.
was the costuming and the
Oh,
way that they made it very gothic, very beautiful. I really enjoyed that, and I like Brad Pitt in pretty much anything Brad Pitt is in. Watching it again as an adult,
mm,
I wanted more of the interviewee. I found the interviewer character to be the most interesting character, and much like you, because I
interesting.
was like, "I want more. I want him to ask more
Mhm.
questions. I don't wanna go into the fantasy of I want to live in the reality of vampires are
Yeah.
real and I can talk to one."
I think
So,
that
yeah, I really
and
appreciate that.
again, I need to reread the book series. Like, I'm so glad you asked me
Mhm.
to watch this movie. First of all, just to finally watch it because this is something I think
Yeah.
everyone has a movie or a TV show that everyone says, "Oh my god, you have to watch this." That you don't watch and then too much time has passed that you can't come clean. Like I've have so many friends who had never seen Star Wars and to me that was crazy town because it's like it was shown in theaters for
Mhm.
so many years, but also I'm from a different era of how movies were shown in theaters. Also, we didn't have a lot of entertainment back then. So you basically either got superheroes or that, or Star
Mhm.
Trek, or Doctor Who if you had British programming, right? So or Canadian programming. So you know, we weren't spoiled for choice like everybody is now. Like I hate to use the phrase these kids today have it easy, but they probably have it easy, but also I feel sorry for them because they're missing out on so much because there's so much to choose from. You know, they don't have the same history of film like I do because I really cherished the things before Blockbuster ever existed, before you could watch any of this. You only got to see things if you were in front of your TV at the right time because there wasn't
Mhm.
even any recording devices yet. So it was like and you had 5 channels to choose from. You didn't have cable yet. Like I'm a child of there was no MTV yet. There was no cable TV yet. I remember we were the first people on our block to get HBO and I thought I was like, you know, Queen of England because I was getting something that it was like no didn't exist before. And you know,
Wow.
that's an era where like that's all you have to go on. So I don't know how I got on this tangent by the way, but look, when you're talking about to backtrack about Claudia, the interesting thing is there are two dads raising that kid, right? You've got
Yeah.
Lestat, who's like, hey, no curfew. Like I'm paraphrasing, but it's like,
Well,
hey, no,
yeah, he's got no
he's like
curfew
the
for his
cool dad.
own ego.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's like the cool dad. Hey, you want to get high? Like that dad.
Yeah.
Whereas
He's not gonna restrain
Louise,
himself, he's not restraining a child.
no, he's like, do what you want. Whereas Louise, like, no, 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 we're raising a child. Like, I need to
Mhm.
instill ethics, instill a
Yep.
sense of morality, which is interesting coming from a vampire. Because also, these are killers. If you really boil it down, vampires are serial killers. So the fact that we have serial killers trying to have ethics,
Well,
trying to
making
like,
a child into a serial killer is dangerous, so I think
right?
Lestat is at least aware of that, like, if we do
Right?
not train
Well,
this pit bull, it could maul someone.
but also, I don't even think it was that. I think for him, it was it's weird because like sometimes I think, oh, he did it because he wanted to keep Louis. He wanted to keep Louis happy.
Mhm,
He wanted to have
mhm.
something that they could do together. He
Yeah,
wanted to show his human.
yeah.
He wanted to
Let's
show
train
Louis
this
that
dog together.
right, like he wanted to show Louis that he could be human and redeemable.
Mhm,
Uh, but he's not. He basically was trying to be someone for Louis that he could never be because Lestat's a
mhm.
killer. Before he becomes a vampire, he's a killer. Before he's an asshole before he's a vampire. And vampire just accentuates what you were before, by the way. So it's not like going to change
Mhm.
you into something. So if you were a monster before, you're a mega monster as a vampire. And if you were like, you know, wholesome and cared about humanity, when you become a vampire, that's hard because you have to really reconcile the fact that you're eating humans. You're killing them off, and it's not debatable. You have to do that to survive, and you can live off of rats, but if you really want to live, you have to do what the rules say. So with Claudia and that character role, you see her turn into a brat for sure, but also if she had just remained human, I wonder she'd probably still be a brat because she has a dad
She
that's
was yeah,
right. That's like basically do what you
she's
want,
what they
and then
made
has
her,
another
yeah.
dad who's like, no, no, no. and then they give her a companion, like a nanny, like an au pair nanny person, against her
That
will, by the way.
character.
By the way, no consent. Could you imagine, hey, Mary Poppins, you're Mary Poppins forever to this vampire who's, by the way, going to be only a child for a very short time. And then you're going to have to be with this adult that's shaped like a
What
child.
that is servitude,
But I
indeed.
will say that character in the book really fell in love with Madeline as her child, even though it wasn't her child. And that
Mhm.
character in the book was so heart-wrenching when they do die, because
Mhm.
she does really try to protect Claudia from Lestat, by the way,
I
from like all
know,
this
it
other
is
stuff.
so heart-wrenching, though.
It's
It's a
heart-wrenching, but
great scene.
also
I think that's my favorite scene.
but I do want to bring her up because I want to bring that because it then leads to the thing I really love, which is the Theater of the Vampires. And I loved this
Yeah?
so much.
Yeah?
And they have it in the series, they have it
Alright.
in the book. Oh my God, I love this. I love this so much. I wanted to be part of that troop for so like I was like, oh, what a cool thing. What a cool thing.
Mhm.
I love that.
Yeah.
But it makes sense. If you're a vampire, you want to go to vampire things that are
Did
vampire
you
safe.
notice the very young Anton Yelchin in that
Sure did.
scene?
I sure did. I sure did.
Yeah, little baby. That is a very fun scene. I think a lot of people really enjoy that. Antonio is only in a splash of this film, but he really does shine.
And that movie was so, because of the movie and because of the book, that Theater de la I'm going to say it all wrong. Theater de it's French. I'm not going to do French accent. That's just going to ruin humanity if I try to do that. But in the 90s, there was this thing that was happening where it's called aerial acting. I think Cirque du Soleil has it, obviously. It's a thing in circuses where you have, trapeze artists.
I do this. I do
Did
this.
you? Do you do it?
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
a klutz and afraid of heights, and I was like, I'm just gonna accidentally hang myself, and that's how I go out. So I know my limits. I never did it,
Mm.
but in this time period in the 90s, it was huge. So like, in Denver, there was a troupe, and it was called the Theater des Vampires, and they did these things to like the soundtracks to like Ministry and Concrete Blonde and Nine Inch
Mhm.
Nails and Curve and like all these like goth kind of raver bands, right? And
You can go
industrial
to
bands.
House of Yes in Brooklyn right now, and they are still doing it.
Yeah, it's getting a resurgence, which I love. I'm seeing all these
Yeah.
TikTokers doing it now, and I'm like, oh my God, yay. But it was a thing because of that book and because of that movie that was a thing. And during Halloween, they would
Mhm.
reenact the scene from the movie or from the book. And it was a thing. Like it was like goth prom to go to this thing because it was they would dress as vampires, they would do the whole thing, they would reenact the scene. It was such, but they were emulate flying, right? Because you can't fly,
Mhm.
but they could do it in a way where if you're wearing all dark and it's dark ribbons and it's basically people watching this going, what the hell are you two talking about? Just Google aerial. I don't know what the proper term of it, but we always call it
Aerial
aerial.
silks. Aerial silks is the terminology, or aerial
Mhm.
chiffons if you are in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, and it's a way of entertaining. It's basically a theater. It's like dance meets gymnastics meets aerobatic meets trapeze. So it's very beautifully done. It's very gorgeous. Cirque du Soleil has been doing it for years, but there's other
Mhm.
troops that do it, other dancers that do it. I think there's a girl that tours with the Dita Von Teese, burlesque. Burlesque does it.
Mhm.
It's huge in
I
burlesque
mean,
world.
Pink brought it into her show as
Yeah,
well.
Pink does it. Violet
Yeah.
Chachki,
I
who was a winner of
used
Drag Race, she does it.
Mhm.
It's beautiful. It's so beautiful to watch too. It's just so
Yeah,
cool,
I've done
right?
a couple of nutcrackers at the end of the year, I've done New Year's
Yeah,
celebrations. I used to teach down to 1.5. Like, they're people love it. It's a great way to,
it's a great
get
thing.
yourself
And
fit. If
yeah,
you're
so
listening to this and you're, like, scared of being up in the air, there's also a thing called aerial yoga, which is very similar, and it's a great place to start. So I suggest looking. There's tons of places near people.
yeah,
Look for aerial yoga near you, and I bet you'll
yeah,
like
and
it.
also they do teach it with nets, and they're not gonna. It's like trapeze
Oh,
on
there's
YouTube.
crash pads. Yeah, there's
Yeah, there's
crash
crash.
pads,
It's
but
like gymnastics. It's like gymnastics when you do the
that
flipping off
being
the horse.
said, I have dislocated a floating rib and, like,
Full
like, you can
disclosure,
truly hurt yourself.
I'm just gonna say right now, I've had many years of dance, being a go-go dancer, being a cage dancer, doing roller derby, and I didn't even do it that
Oh,
long,
roller
and I still have.
derby.
I'm a klutz on top. I had a major accident in June where I broke my wrist, broke my two front teeth, and they got embedded in my lip. It took forever to heal. My
Oh,
wrist still
fun.
hurts. But I've had so many broken bones that I'm just like, that is the one plus of vampirism. You heal
Mm.
quickly. I will
Yes,
say,
yes. I would
would
take that in a hot bait.
I would take that in a hot second. Also, the older I get, the more I'm like, yeah, I'm okay with murdering people if I don't get arthritis.
If I could get up in the morning and not have my
Right?
back hurt, I think I'd kill at least a couple people.
There is a certain age you get when you stop making fun of your dad for making that noise he gets when he gets up of a chair for too long, that you're starting to make that sound, and you're like, I've become my parents. I now constantly talk about my ailments, which I always thought was so boring and stupid as a child. I would hang out with my parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles, and all they would talk about was surgeries. I was like the queen of the hour because I was the first in our family to get braces, like metal braces. So to them, it was like sci-fi, right? So I was always, they'd push me out and everyone look at my teeth for a while and talk about it. And then I'd get to leave and go watch TV. And then they'd talk about all their ailments.
Basically their own geek show.
Oh
Look at
my
this chick
God.
with the metal on her face.
I used to make fun of that, like you wouldn't believe, because I was like, God, how boring. Like, can't they be intellectual and talk about like books and movies and TV and like
Vampires.
philosophy and religion? Like, not religion, because that's only going to be one thing and it's just Jesus church stuff. But you know what I mean? Like, current events, something. No, they're just all talking about what pains them, what ails them. And now I'm like, yeah, I'm in that age group now. That's all I do. Now I think then I looked at what my number one Reddit search is, and it's always a health related item. WebMD, which used to predates Wiki, predates everything. When you had any symptom for anything, you would look that
cancer.
up. And you were like, cancer, malaria, some weird disease from the jungle that you think you have, like, but just based on the symptoms. So like, I will say I'm very pro vampirism for no need for health insurance, no need for worrying about any of the ailments, allergies, asthma, anything like that.
Yeah.
I do wonder though, because it corrects cancer. So like Lestat's mom, she had cancer. So he saved her on her deathbed by making her a vampire. Cancer's gone. They talk about her transformation in the book. It's not Ozempic. It's not like you're losing a bunch of weight and you're beautiful. They do this in We Are the Night, which is also a great vampire film where it's like someone who has sort of a drug problem and then she becomes a vampire and suddenly she takes one bath and like all her bad hair dye is out and she has gorgeous hair and she's suddenly gorgeous. I'm like, yeah, it's not like an instant makeover. Also, it's kind of like ghost rules, right? When you die and you're a ghost,
you're as fat as you are when you died.
Yeah, that's your outfit, that's your weight. So like if you die and you didn't take care of yourself, good luck. You don't get a makeover as a ghost. That's you. That's forever you.
That's my fear is I will die with bad roots. Like give me at least.
I don't care
right
about that.
after
I just want to make sure. I just don't want to die in my Godzilla onesie. I want to die in like a nice outfit. You know what I mean? Because then I'm gonna be like
so much more comfortable. I don't want to die.
I'm not gonna be scary.
Dress.
I mean, I have afterlife plans. And one of them is I have a list of people that did me wrong. And if they're still alive, I'm haunting the hell out of them. And I'm going to make their life horrible.
It'll be so scary how comfy you look.
There are going to be a lot of exes that are going to get a little visit from me. And I don't want to look like I'm wearing my Godzilla onesie. I'm not going to look scary. They're going to be like, why is Bonnie here? So I don't want to be that. But with vampire rules, I think with the Anne Rice vampire rules, you get a little sexier. Like you lose, if you were skinny from cancer, you fill out. And then if you were kind of like, if you had gout or something, I think they get rid of that. But I do wonder because a lot of mental illnesses are chemical based. If you're right. So if you're schizophrenic or if you have, bipolar disorder or depression,
that's an interesting thought.
And that's brain. That's not in your head. That is your head. That's
just ADHD is a chemical imbalance. Yeah.
So would that even you out? Like, would you no longer be neurospicy? Would you no longer be autistic? Would you no longer be depressed? I don't know. So again, I'm telling you, I still have the journal from high school and it's a list of questions of when I finally meet a vampire. And that's one of the questions is, hey, will it get rid of my cramps? Like I had all the like high school questions, like cramps.
That's why the interviewer part is so interesting. I'm so curious about your life, but like,
I'd be like, yeah, tell your story. But first, I've got 300 questions I want you to answer.
But does ADHD get cured by vampirism? But also, like, you've been alive for hundreds of years, and you fell in love with a guy, and he unrequited, and you killed your daughter. Yeah, but how does it affect my brain chemistry?
Yeah. But also, it's like you also have to adapt with the time. So you cannot get stuck in a decade where you like the music. Tough. You're going to have to be that person that's on it. You have to learn like now it must be a nightmare to be a vampire because you have to know all the social media stuff, especially if you become a vampire as a teenager. Are you kidding me? You cannot be the one teenager that doesn't understand TikTok. You cannot be the one teenager who doesn't know what the latest band is.
Spirit. He's just the old spirit.
No, people will know something's up if you aren't blending in. That's why I always feel bad for the teenager vampires because I'm like, ugh, high school. I fucking hated high school. I don't want to be stuck in high school. I want to be made in like college age or maybe just graduated from college age, not high school. That's the worst place. That's like prison. I don't want to be stuck there with a bunch of hormonal children who think they know everything. Oh my God, what a nightmare. That's like being stuck at the kids' table during Thanksgiving, but none of them think you're cool. Like, no, I want to be with like the Claudias or like the old guys. I don't want to be with the teenagers. I don't like being around teenagers normally because I feel like Steve Buscemi with the backpacker. I'm like, hello, fellow kids. Like, I always feel like
fellow kids, yeah.
And I'm like, I do this for a living. I do gaming marketing and Gen Z marketing. And I just got told the other day that half the words that I thought Gen Z liked, they do not like. And I'm like, oh, they don't like it when you say squad or crew, or they hate vibes. You can't say vibes. I'm like, but that's...
yeah, vibes is like a word I make fun of whenever I can.
No, but not vibes as a noun. Vibes as a verb too. And vibes as a verb is very gay talk. So it's like, but I like to say I'm vibing. And they're like, don't say that. And it's like, oh, what can I say? And then when you try to say stuff that they like, they're like, no, you're too old. Don't even try. So like if you were a vampire, how would you function around teenagers? I would lose my shit. And then also you just have to know everything. All the tech you have to learn. Holy crap. Like they do talk about that in the books because there are characters that had to learn how to drive a car for the first time. Or if you're slumbering for 200 years, do you know how much tech you have to learn? It'd be like you're basically Fifth Element girl where you have to watch all the TV while you're eating chicken just to like figure out humanity. No, thank you. I don't want it. Yeah. Are you kidding?
So we're going to pull in towards the end of the episode right now.
I'm so sorry. I went on so many tangents and I warned you I was going to be the worst podcast guest ever.
And when we pull towards the end, we're going to have just the same 3 questions that I normally have. But we did not, at the beginning, talk about the kind of stuff you wanted to plug. So we're going to tangent away from interview for a second. I'm going to ask you our 3 final questions. But let's take about 10, 15 minutes to talk a little bit about you as a person and the stuff you might want to let us know about. I know for a fact, because I listen to the show all the time, that you're on the night shift with Jenna Hayes and Renee Rune. And you just did an episode on Elm Street, which people can go and listen to where all podcasts are available, and it will be in the links. And you're about to talk about a film that, first of all, Movie Night Extravaganza, which I'm on and you're on all the time, is going to have Renee come on the 29th to talk about. But you're going to talk about it first this Saturday. You're talking about The Substance.
Yeah. We're talking about The Substance. It'll be like, I think it'll be the 3rd time I've seen the movie. I'm not going to talk about the movie itself because I think there's a lot of people that need to see it fresh. Like I always tell people it's getting so much accolades and talk, and a lot of people are on TikTok and social talking about it. And I tell everyone, just watch it. Don't watch the trailer. Don't read any recaps or YouTubers or influencers talking about it. Don't even talk to your friends who have seen it. Like, just go and watch it. Like, this is the worst. This is the worst plug for my show because I'm like, yeah, but I want you to also watch me talk about it.
People who have seen it, plenty can come and watch it afterwards, or already have, because it's been out for a while.
It's been out for a while. It's weird. It's a weird film. It's a weird horror film. I think now we call them genre films, right? Like,
body horror genre.
Yeah, I mean, most of the movies that we talk about on my podcast, The Night Shift with Renee Rune and Jenna Hayes, we always, and it's always like a, 2 to 3 hour discussion like this, where it's because it's me times 2. So there's 2 other people that talk like me. We're on tangents, but also Renee brings her background of, she's very savvy and understands film history, film lore. Jenna, who is a former adult film star, she brings a different level because she's an actress and a film writer as well, but also she just got a degree in psychology, so she's our psychologist, so she's like our intellectual psychologist, but also she understands a lot about a lot. Like I can't wait till we talk about Maxine with her, because it's about, X was also the world of adult films, but Maxine really is because it's the 80s. And so I can't wait to talk to her about that. But we usually talk about films that are female led. So they have a strong female character that's a main character, or it's written by a woman, or it's directed by a woman. So a lot of our films are like, a lot of them are indies, like Hellbender from the Addams Family, not the snappy Addams Family, but there's a production team. Yeah,
I didn't even
a
blink,
family
but I'm
that
like, oh yeah,
actually,
now I hear it.
Toby Poser and her daughters and her husband, they make horror films, and Hellbender
They're awesome.
really put them on the map. But they've done, I think, Where the Devil Roams. They do a bunch of them, and their films are very cool. Like they do the soundtracks themselves. They're just a cool family. I wish they would adopt me. I keep asking them to. But we also cover films like The Love Witch. We cover, that are where she walks a girl that walks home. The girl walks alone at night.
Yes.
I'm butchering that title, but a lot of those. And then we're starting to get in more 80s films. Like I really want us to do Nightmare on Elm Street. So we did that. We did Jennifer's Body, which is not an 80s film, but it's iconic.
It's a good one.
So we try to cover a lot of stuff. And I have my own list of films that I want us to cover because I love the Ginger Snap series, because that's female teens, sisters. One of them becomes a werewolf. And that's great. And that is my favorite werewolf series. So like we cover a lot of that, but we talk a lot too about feminism. We talk a lot about sexuality. We talk a lot about gender stuff. It's not dry though. So it's not like academic times 10, because I have the attention span of a hamster on Adderall. So I can't be too, and also I get really intimidated if we just turned it into a college course. So it's not that. So it's just 3 women from 3 different backgrounds talking about horror films that they love. And we just pick one film, watch it, talk about it to death. And if we're lucky, we have the filmmaker on. So we've interviewed a lot of the directors, screenwriters, mostly directors of these films. So it's really fun. And we do it usually once a month. So that's a podcast I'm on. I do a book show with Felicia Day. It's just a book club show that we do on her podcast on Twitch, called Felicitation. So we haven't done it this month because she's in Poland doing family stuff, but like we try to do it once, and it's everything. It's nonfiction, fiction, it's whatever we want to read. And it's just me talking. And again, it's like we talk about the book for 10 minutes and then everything else for an hour. So it's that kind of discussion.
Like you can find somebody to summarize the book for you, most people, but it's the stuff that you get into around it. Like you saying that thing about is ADHD cured by vampirism is something I will think about until the heat death of the universe, and I never thought of before.
Because
that's awesome.
And also it just, I was really into the science of vampirism. We talked about on Movie Night Extravaganza, The Hunger. And that is a movie about vampirism and science, right? Because it's about vampires dying and they don't know why they're dying quickly. The age thing is speeding up. And so they try to get help from Susan Sarandon's character, who's a scientist, and hopefully they'll figure it out and blah, blah, blah. And there's lots of different horror films that have, oh God, vampires are dying out. We need to fix this. What's the science behind it? I was obsessed as a teenager, as a goth teenager who loved vampire stuff. I was obsessed trying to find out, well, if it's not a witch curse, which a lot of vampire lore starts out with, like I believe Buffy was like that. Vampire Diaries is like that, right? It's a witch curse, right? It's a curse from the Romani or from witches. Or it's something to do with, I don't know, God, right? So if you want to take the Lucifer into things, and Morning Star was a vampire, or Egyptian culture where it's Osiris, who is the first undead because he went to the underworld, and there's a whole thing with that. And the Queen of the Damned covers Osiris and Isis and Osiris history, and that's her background. That's what that lore is from the very, very, very first vampire. But if it's really just science-based, there are things in real life like reverse progeria. So progeria is those kids that look like elderly people, right? They age quickly.
Benjamin Button thing.
But can you flip it? Because then can you just go backwards then? And that's what The Hunger was. She was a researcher in progeria, and she was trying to stop it. She's trying to find a cure for these kids. If you find a cure for aging fast, then you could probably find a cure for aging entirely. And alchemists have been trying to do this since alchemy, right? Which is just white dude witchcraft is what I call it. But that's but then you also have people with porphyria, which is when they get sunlight, they burn instantly. They have a very sensitive reaction to sunlight. That's a real thing. A lot of those people were considered vampires back in the day because before science. right? Because science, it just explains everything, hopefully. And we have a lot of things that we can't explain with science still to this day. But I was
Mhm.
like, okay, so maybe that's a thing. Maybe porphyria is a thing. So I was just like, there's got to be a vampire science thing. And there's not. I mean, at least I don't know it. But I love the science behind it. So when I read this book series, I was like, okay, this is their set of rules. What does that mean? Like, why do you have to have a certain kind of earth? Like, a lot of times you
Yeah.
have to have the earth of your homeland, but people are so global now that why would I need that? Like, why do you need that? Why is that a thing? Or is it just dirt itself? Is it the iron in the dirt itself?
Mhm.
Is it a certain thing with your skin? So I care about all that stuff. So like when I watch this movie, and I'm so glad that they covered a lot of the stuff in the book series is great. And I highly recommend the book series. I highly recommend watch the movies. So there is a Vampire Lestat movie, I believe. There's definitely a Queen
Uh-huh.
of the Damned. Queen of the
Yeah.
Damned panned a lot as the worst one because
Yeah, I
it
mean, it had the whole Aaliyah thing and the
well, yeah, poor
AGI,
Aaliyah.
and that was a hard
That
thing
was
to get
sad.
over. In
Yeah, the
fairness, that was
Leela
very hard to get over.
and I highly recommend watching it because it's a beautifully I mean, the acting's not great,
Mhm.
and it's not the actor's fault. It's I would say
No.
this the dialogue's not great. It's not taken from the
Mhm.
book directly. It's just I feel like it was if Chat GPT existed back then, I'd be like, did AI write this? Because it didn't feel like it felt like it was
Mhm.
like sped through and it
Do you
didn't
ever
really
think you'd cover the series on the, Felicia Day book series that you're talking about? Like, maybe
oh yeah,
revisit it
I'm gonna make her
together?
read it. Oh, 100%. I think we did another book. We did in the very before book talk, before TikTok, in the early aughts, I feel so old. In the early aughts, I had a show, book club show with Felicia Day and two other women, Veronica Belmont and Kyla Caseby, and it was called uh, it was it was called Vaginal Fantasy Romance Book Club. It was the name of the joke. The name of the show is kind of a joke because when you go to Barnes and Noble and they have like this is the romance section, this is the horror section. Some bookstores will go more in depth, right? They'll be like, this is the alien horror, or this is the
Yes, yes.
romantic, historical, whatever. And there was a bookstore, I think, in San Francisco or LA that they listed it as vaginal fantasy. And she's like, oh my God, that's hilarious. We're naming our club that. We did not think in the future, we did not know we were going to be doing the show for like almost a decade. Like, it was 7 years. We have like
Oh,
over 100. You
wow.
can watch it on YouTube. We were the first ever
Put
book
the
club
links in
show
the
on
comment for people.
we were the
Yeah.
first book club show on YouTube, but we did it live on
Whoa.
Google Hangout when Google Hangout started. So that's how we did our show. We did it as a live show on Google Hangout that was recorded and kept on YouTube. It started on Geek and Sundry before Legendary bought them. So, and it was at the height of Felicia Day being famous. So we had a lot of viewers and a lot of people like walking in thinking it was porn and it's not. So that was funny in the comment section. But we covered everything. And when it came, and I was brought in for comic relief because I hate romance books, but I like
Mhm.
monster romance books. So I was the one that was like, oh, we're gonna read we're gonna be reading I'd always pick stuff that was weird. Like, I was like, we're gonna read this book that's a romance book of this human woman and a dinosaur. And it's called Taken by T-Rex. And it's horrible, but we're gonna read it. And then I was also like, we're gonna read it. And I'm like, we're gonna read Kraken stuff. We're gonna read there's a Cthulhu erotica anthology that comes out every year, and it's a bunch of short erotica stories, but Cthulhu has to be the main character. So I made them read that. All the vampire stuff, I made them read all the witchy witch stuff, all the werewolf stuff. It's also at the height of Twilight. I made us read it as a book B. So we always had two books, the main book, and then if you were a fast reader, you could read the second book and we would talk about it. But
Ah,
I hated Twilight, but I wanted to read it to show that I read it because I don't like judging things without watching or reading it first because
of course, me neither. You
I
gotta
feel like
give it a chance. You
well,
don't
most
know. That's
people
the
that
whole point of this show.
well, I mean, most people that ban books never ever read the book. They're just going off of the
Yeah,
hype of it. So like
yeah.
that's why I was always like, oh, we'll just do that. So Felicia's book club I do with her now, it's everything. So we read
Yeah.
nonfiction, we read memoirs, we read science books, we read, I think right now we're reading Jenny Lawson's book, uh uh Let's Pretend It Didn't Happen, which is a fun book of essays. She's a great humorist. But we've read books on like mushroom science and microdosing, and also Alan Rickman's memoir, which is great. And we've
Yeah.
read everything, but it's a fun show because it's really just Felicia and I catching up because we don't get to see each other much. So
Yeah.
it's like if you stumbled upon us at a coffee house, that's the show. So
That's a good
that's what we
vibe.
do.
That's
Uh,
I'm vibing with that vibe.
yeah, and again, like I love being on other people's podcasts clearly because I've totally ruined
Yeah.
this one, but I like doing them too. It's just honestly, I'm a podcast addict, so I love listening to other people talk about all the stuff that I love talking about. So even before this episode, I was like, oh, I wonder what Gen Z thinks of this movie because it's before they were born. It's also vampire culture is so prominent and so mainstream now, but it wasn't back
Yeah.
then. What do they think? Is they think it's goofy? Do they think it's tropey? And it's funny because like a lot of young people that are used to having the pick of a bazillion vampire movies to choose from, and there's new ones that come out every year. Like Abigail was great, and all those.
Yeah.
Oh, what do you do when this was the only thing we had? And also, it's kind of like I have to
Mhm.
remind people again, we did not have streaming, we did not have access to everything. So when a new vampire movie would come out, and it's a modern day vampire movie with real actors that we are into, maybe not Tom Cruise for me, but like everybody else, that was a big fucking deal. And there wasn't Buffy yet. There wasn't Vampire
There's big
Diaries yet. There
stakes.
wasn't there
Yeah, there's
wasn't
big
Twilight.
stakes.
There wasn't Blade. Blade wasn't even out. So it's like you get what you get. And now it's like there's so much that I'm like, yeah, you guys don't understand the literal thirst we had as vampire fans. Where we're like, I can only watch certain things over and over and over before I get bored. Luckily, The Hunger was my go-to, and it's a great movie.
That is a
But
great movie.
I mean, it's like now it's like you can have any kind of vampire movie, found footage vampire, romance vampire, really scary, like 30 days. Is that
Mhm.
the Alaska one? Or you can have like children vampires. You have vampire series. There's like how many TV series have been all vampires? And that started with Dark Shadows back in the day, but now it's like there's a zillion of them. So there's a lot to choose from. I'm glad that you had me on because it was the only reason I watched this movie. Because for the longest time, I'm like, well, I never watched it because of Tom Cruise. I'm not going to start now. And then you mentioned on when we were doing Vampire Week at the other movie blog
Movie
podcast,
night extravaganza.
you were like, I do a show where I talk to people who haven't watched a certain movie and then they watch it and then we discuss it. And I'm like, okay, I guess this is the time to do it because what a better reason to watch it and then discuss it with you and tell you how I geeked out about it.
Yeah. So, in our last 5 minutes here, I am gonna ask you 3 main questions for this
Okay.
experience, and they are: did you like the film? Would you
Mm-hmm.
recommend it to another person?
Mm-hmm.
And how did the experience do you feel like you wish you had
Vindicated.
seen it sooner?
Oh, regrets. Oh yeah.
Regrets.
Regrets. Okay. First question. I like the film, but also I think I'm a certain age that
Yeah.
I give things grace now. I'm not so
Yeah,
like.
yeah.
Also, when you work for Lucasfilm during the prequel era, and which I
Bless.
call the apology tour, because a lot of people grew up on the original trilogy, the prequels were not their Star Wars. Now it doesn't matter. Now, like when you talk to young people about Star Wars, they think everyone loved all of those movies equally. So they have no idea that there was like this fandom anger that came out. Which by the way, now is just default on social media is to be angry fan, right? But back then it was like,
Yeah.
oh, it's my job to deal with this.
Especially about that series.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I was a
there's a
community
oof.
manager. I was in charge of message boards and and all the social media, so I had to deal with all that.
Oh.
But
Oh, I'm sorry.
no, it's fine. It was a great learning experience as a creator and a fan, on both sides of the fence,
Mhm,
where you're
mhm.
like, people that love something so dearly in a certain way,
Mhm.
if you change it, you have to be ready to deal with the backlash, but also you have to take responsibility for changing it. You can't just be like, well, too bad. No, you have to know that these are people like for me, as someone who was shy, someone who was neurodivergent, someone who was queer and in the closet for a long time, movies were my church. Movies were my outlet, but also so were books. So was TV.
Mhm.
Books, I
Mhm.
think books I felt closer to my heart because I'm the one casting it, right?
Exactly,
Because if
your
you're
own
reading a book
imagination.
and there's no movie or TV based on that story and you're reading a book, you're the one that's the casting agent. You're the one that's making the movie in your brain. So
Mhm.
when you love something so much and it's in your brain a certain way and then it becomes a movie, you are either gonna love it or hate it, right? There's not a lot of gray
Mhm.
area. And so for me at that
Mhm.
time, I was like, absolutely not. I am so angry. I'm a 20 something that's really pissed off at this Tom Cruise guy because I was like, he doesn't even look like Tom Cruise. He looks like Roger Daltrey from The Who. Like he had a bad
Oh.
perm. It
Oh,
was a bad wig. He had the
yeah.
worst wig. He had the worst hair. He didn't have fangs.
Oh, I see that
He
now.
couldn't talk right with the fangs. He kept slipping
Mhm.
in and out of accents that weren't accurate. I was so angry with him because I felt like he didn't do the work. And I know that Anne Rice later liked him in that character. Whatever. She flipped
Doesn't
and
mean
she.
you have to, though.
But I remember at that age, though, I was like, absolutely not. I'm
Mhm.
taking it. This is that hill I die on. I'm not watching that piece of crap. And I was so angry
Yeah.
because I liked the other actors that were in it. So I was like, I'm not watching this. And then I was so adamant. And then in my 30s, I was like, I got other things to worry about. In my 40s, I forgot it existed. And then I think it was like later on in my late 40s, like I guess I could watch it, but then I was like, there's so many other things I'd rather watch, right? And
So
then
much media.
you came along. You came along and you're like, well, I do a show, so let's watch it. So I was like, fine, I'll watch it. I loved it. But I had to like kind of sometimes do this and not look at Tom Cruise. Or I had to like close my eyes and just imagine someone else as Tom Cruise. And then anyone else that was on screen, I was like, perfect. So I loved it. I thought it was good. It's not my favorite vampire movie, but it's not the one I hate.
No.
I have other vampire movies I hate. It's not that. So I'm glad I finally
Good.
watched it. So thank you for that.
You're
What was the second
welcome.
question? Sorry, that was a
Would
very
you
long.
recommend it to other
Oh yeah,
people?
of course. Yeah. But I will say this, because I love the book so much. And it's not a long book. It's a quick read.
Mhm.
You can read it in a weekend.
Really?
Oh yeah, you can.
Really?
Also, it's a quick audiobook. It's an audiobook. You can listen to it like you
Oh,
listen to a podcast.
okay.
I'm not an audiobook person because I zone out too easily. I get distracted too easily. So I have to read something to really immerse myself in the world. But
Mhm.
I would say read it. Read Interview with the Vampire or listen to it as an audiobook first. Then, and also I would say maybe Vampire Lestat as well, the book.
Okay.
Then watch Interview with the Vampire, the movie. I think it'll be a richer experience for you because you'll have the backstories of all these characters that sometimes are only on screen for 5 minutes, but they have
Mhm.
many, many, many chapters, or their existence really, really shaped Louis and Lestat. And you don't see that. Like Armand is so much bigger in the books. The Theater of the Vampires is bigger.
Mm.
Madeleine, who's the au pair mother figure for
Mhm.
Claudia, she has a bigger role. So I would say read the books first, and then go watch it. But again, it could also be generational. I think younger people probably are like, it's no big deal. For me, it was a big deal because it was my Bible. It was my book. It was the
Mhm.
book that defined
Mhm.
me. And I was like, you can't be screwing around with the casting on that. And also, I think
Mhm.
too, because I know so many drag queens, I now pay attention to wigs a lot
Oh my
more.
god.
And the
Me
fact that
too.
even today, some of the stuff that Nick like, even the stuff today that what's her toes? I had her on the tip of my tongue. She married Tom Cruise. She's Australian.
Nicole Kidman.
Nicole Kidman. Sorry, I'm getting dementia as we're doing the podcast. Nicole Kidman, I don't know what it is. She can ask in her contract for better wigs, and she needs to start doing that because
And I would generally encourage.
the last 5 things I've seen her in, I'm like, that is a horrible wig. And now
Like,
I can't not think Party City. I can't not think Spirit
she
Halloween.
doesn't even get, like, a lace front wig. Like,
I
they are
know.
the cheapest wig you could possibly get. Like,
If
I
you
can
are,
see the band.
please get a good wig, especially if your character's playing someone rich. They're not gonna, they don't do, I don't, so that's a thing that takes me out of a film. So the
Yeah.
wigs were great in this film, except for Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise's Lestat
I
wig.
don't believe him as having curly hair. I don't believe there's any version of his genetics that winds up with
No.
curly hair.
And when you read the book, it's not described as that at all. It's more
So
like
why
the
did you
bike
do that?
because he
Yeah.
wanted in the movie, and I think also he had enough power to do what anyway. So I do recommend it. And then what was the last
Mhm.
question? What was
Do
the
you
last
have
question?
any regrets about having taken so long to see it? Do you wish you had
Yes
seen
and
it
no.
sooner?
I feel like a hypocrite because I tell so many people don't judge something just solely on a trailer. Don't
Uh-huh.
judge something by a book cover. Don't judge something if also it's like the reverse hipster thing where it's like, oh, well, everyone loves it, so I'm not going to watch it out of principle. Like,
Yeah.
don't do that. Because I also hate that because I'm like, well, you're not really being that original because there's plenty of people who act just like that. So I would
Mhm.
say if something is even remotely interesting to you, read it, watch it, consume it. Don't
Mhm.
don't don't be like me. Don't be stubborn over stubborn things. And Tom Cruise is a great actor. I just don't think he should have been Lestat. And But hey, I'm glad Tom Hanks wasn't. Like that would have been weird. And you know, there's other actors that maybe at that time wouldn't have done it justice either that I wanted. I think Johnny
Mhm.
Depp would have done a great job,
I
but
think so,
that's not
yeah.
what they wanted. That's not what they wanted. It's kind of like with Constantine in the comics. He's a blonde British guy. In the movies, he's
Yeah.
Keanu Reeves, and Keanu Reeves did such a good job
It's a
playing
really good
Constantine.
job.
And it's
Yeah.
not, he looks nothing like the Constantine in the comics.
Mhm.
So I was like, maybe I'm kind of a hypocrite because I love Constantine. We're getting another Constantine movie with Keanu, by the way. So I'm like,
Oh,
yeah,
fantastic.
yeah, he finally
Yeah.
said they're doing it. Yeah. So I'm like, but that's a perfect example of you read the comic, you think a British guy, you think like Sting,
Mhm.
like I think it was supposed to be Sting or some British dude was supposed to play him.
Mhm.
And Keanu doesn't look anything like the character, and he made that character iconic. So I shouldn't be so
Mhm.
rough on Mr. Tom Cruise. I'm sure he's really worried about what I'm thinking right now. I'm sure he's having like, I'm sure he's really sad.
Scientology, please don't get us. We're sorry. He did a fine job. Just a
Also,
fine job.
on side note, Scientology and vampirism, do that Google search because
And then burn
mhm,
your computer.
remember, no. Scientology, as you know, it's a UFO cult by
Yes,
its
yeah.
origins. It's changed over the years into other things, but it started as, you know. But the vampire thing, vampire cults are huge. There still are. A lot of cults have bloodlettings. A lot of cults are vampire-esque.
Yeah.
Energy
Yeah.
vampires. I think most of LA is run by energy vampires, to be honest. So
I
that's
think
a
that
whole
that is
thing.
the
Psychic.
best modernization of vampirism ever. Like, I have felt my
Yeah. So
body
like,
drain standing next to someone like that.
and do a deep dive
Wow.
on Anne Rice because she not only wrote this series, so she wrote a vampire series, right? That we're talking. She
Mhm.
wrote the Mayfair Witches series, which is now also a TV show. And AMC is killing it with the Anne Rice stuff. I wish she had been alive
Seriously.
to see all of this
Oh,
because she would have
I
been so
know.
excited. The TV series of Interview with Vampires, great. It's flipped a bit. So Louis is African American, and
Mhm.
it's a lot more about Black culture, which I think is perfect and makes sense because of New Orleans. But
Yeah, the
also,
location.
yeah, but also it's beautifully shot. The costumes are great. I didn't really like Lestat, how they have him in the first 5 episodes, but I'm forced
Mhm.
myself to keep watching, and I'm glad I did because now I'm really into it. So if you like the
Nice,
book series,
nice.
I would say if you're gonna, this is my recommendation order: read Interview with the Vampire and maybe Vampire Lestat the books. Those 2 books. They're quick. They're quick. You can do it in a weekend or do audiobooks. Then watch the Interview with Vampire movie, then watch the Interview with Vampire TV series. Now here's the cool thing.
Okay.
So this is like, so I will say Anne Rice is like Marvel universe. So
Yes.
her characters show up in other books. So if you're reading the Mayfair Witches, so the Witching Hour is the first book in the Mayfair Witches book series. Mayfair Witches is the name of the TV show on AMC. Those characters pop into these. So Queen of the Damned is kind of like all drag race all stars. So Queen of the Damned, you have
Oh my
witches
god.
from Mayfair in it. You have all the vampires mentioned in Interview with the Vampire and Vampire Lestat, but then you have Egyptian culture and vampires in the Egyptian era, and then you have crossover because Talamasca. Oh, I just did the showgirls. Talamasca is the group of humans that's cataloging all of the non-human activity and everyone. So they are the ones that know everything. And then you have interactions where some of the Talamasca get made into vampires, and that's a whole thing. And then you have other creatures that pop in and out. So you're going to have other cryptids. You're going to have other. The witches is amazing because they're in it. They're in everything. So I think of it like the Marvel universe, where it's like, oh,
Oh,
that character from that
easily,
movie's in this thing, and now
easily.
they're working. Yeah, so there's a lot of interconnection, and I love that because then that's good world building. Because then you're like, oh, I want to know about this side character because he pops up in this other
Yeah.
thing. So I do
Mhm.
recommend it, and I recommend both shows on AMC. I think both series are really well made. Interview with the Vampire is really fun to watch. The lore is great. Also, on a side note, Vampire Diaries, the TV series, takes a lot of influence from Interview with the Vampire. So I would say
Nice.
I think all of those seasons
Why
are
not
on
go there
Netflix.
as
You
well?
can watch them all on Netflix. So
Yeah.
Interview with the Vampire, and also Buffy does do some call outs to Anne Rice, but Interview with the Vampire, I'm sorry, Vampire Diaries does it more. So
Nice.
but yeah, decades of saying I refuse to watch this movie because I think it's probably crap. I am eating my words right here, right now. Watch Interview with the Vampire, the movie. It's beautifully shot. It's a great time capsule of 90s movie making. So many great actors and actresses also getting their start in this film. Like
Yes. Yeah.
Anton, but also Tandy Newton's in it.
Yeah.
Thandie Newton. There's a lot of actors. You're gonna recognize a lot of people because I was like, holy crap, that's so and so. Like I was just like, oh, was this their first film? Like sometimes they're just like waiter number two. Like it's like that kind of thing. They're not even main
Mhm.
characters. But
Yeah.
no, I love
I
this
love
movie and
that
I
shit
think it's
though.
good. I'm so glad that you made me watch it. So thank you. Thank you for
Mhm.
tolerating me talking nonstop.
Well,
I apologize to your viewers. I'm so sorry.
so, like the best laid plans can go one way, but this show is kind of just about what happens in the conversation. So I want to thank you so much for taking the chance to watch this movie. You have been an incredible wealth of knowledge on the entire world of
Aw.
Anne Rice, for which I don't know. I just know this movie, and it's not only wonderful to get a guest who knows so much, but to get a guest who knows so much and is willing to take a chance at maybe seeing an angle of something they know so much about that they didn't know before. That's a blessing. Thank you
And
so
I
much for doing that.
and thanks for having me on, but also it was just a nice like I've had a kind of a rough week. I think a lot of us have a
Oh
kind of rough
god,
time lately,
yeah.
and it was such a good
Yeah.
thanks for like giving me a moment of escapism, but also kind of reminding me,
Absolutely.
also this was the author that made me want to write horror fiction, but also really made me excited about vampire lore, but also like that was the first Usenet group I was on was alt.vampires and alt.Anne Rice or rec dot and it's like the precursor to message boards, which then of course turned into
Mhm.
LiveJournal and then turned into social media and Tumblr and all that. That started with me trying to find other Anne Rice fans and other fans of Interview with the Vampire. So it's kind of a weird time capsule of the 90s of fandom, but also trying to find other fans to talk to about this. Because you and I talking like this, I would have literally murdered a whole house full of people to have
Oh,
this
bless.
conversation during the time that I was into this stuff because I couldn't find
Oh,
anyone else
yeah.
to talk to about the weird minutia things, the weird nitty gritty of it all, but also just like the fun parts of this. Also, this movie has a good sense of humor. There are moments of this
Mhm.
movie where you're like, oh, that's disturbing but
It's
hilarious.
genuinely
So
funny,
it's not gonna
disturbing,
be like,
yeah.
yeah, it's not gonna be like Shaun of the Dead kind of funny, but there's definitely
Yeah.
moments where you're like, oh yeah, they're
Mhm.
vampires. Like you sometimes you forget because they're so some of them are still hung up on regret, like just being, feeling guilty,
Oh,
and then
yeah.
others are just like, I don't care, you're my food.
It could be very stuffy and very Victorian and very, like, ennui about them being so, but it also has moments of levity, and that
That's
is
the
why I think
that's
it works.
Yeah, and that's why I
Absolutely.
always make fun of Underworld. I love the Underworld movies, they're
I
great,
do love them
but they
too,
are
yeah.
so snobby vampires. Those vampires are so snobby and
Mhm.
mean, and they're mean girls. They're just a bunch of mean girls, and
I
also I
agree,
would say
it's yeah.
The Twilight vampires are really mean too. Like they're just kind of
Oh, the original
snobs,
Mean
but it's
Girls,
like
yeah.
I wouldn't hang out with the snobs. I'd hang out with the punk rockers and the roller derby vampires and like the vampires that like to have fun, but they're also not jerks. So I do think that this movie isn't about the snobbiness of it. It's more about the humanity side of it, but also becoming a
Mhm,
monster over time because
mhm.
you are eating you're dating people and killing them, or you're eating people, or you're just willy-nilly killing people because you think you're at a McDonald's and you forget you were also once human. Like you forget you're
Yeah,
human. So I think
yeah.
it's a good look at what humanity means and what it should be and
Mhm,
shouldn't be. So there's a lot of levels.
mhm.
So thank you for letting me, or not letting me, thank you for convincing me to watch this. But also it's beautifully shot. So even if you
Yeah,
don't even pay attention to the dialogue, it's very pretty.
yeah. I think it's
So
the perfect movie for a week where a lot of us are forgetting why we would want to be human.
yeah, I mean, I'm literally getting off this phone call and I'm probably just gonna keep watching the new season of What We Do in the Shadows. It's the last season. I'm very
Yes.
sad it's the last season,
That
but
is
this
what
is
I
also
have
a
been doing too.
fun season because Guillermo
Yeah.
got a job at an office and it's funny corporate. And I just recently joined a company that's very corporate, Microsoft, after being at entertainment companies and like little rinky dink places. Like now I'm reminding myself, oh, right, corporate. And it's fun to
Corporate
watch
speak.
that because yeah, and that's also a good series to watch of what it would be like to be 3,000 years old and you've never been to a Best Buy. What's that experience
Oh
like?
my
And that's
fucking
what We
god,
Do in the
I love
Shadows
that.
does. It really makes fun of that and really shows the humorous side of what it's like to be immortal and not understand anything. And it's really funny.
And
So it's good.
mhm. And how much
And
the corporate life is almost like the vampire cult is, I think, very, very
it
funny.
kind of is.
Very,
Yeah,
very
I will
funny.
say it's very culty.
They're out so
But
late
also
at
it's very
night, yeah.
and it's also like, dog eat dog world kind of situation. It's very
Mhm.
cutthroat. So and it's also very like safety in numbers too. So I don't know, but I think when we're in a time, and I do want to put this out there at the end to put a positive spin on everything. We live in uncertain times. Every generation has uncertain times. Some have wars, some have catastrophes, some have plagues, some have terrorism, some have whatever. Take your pick, right? There's something in every generation that defines them or whatever, traumatizes them. And I will say we will get through it. We're humans. We've lived this long. We've survived this long. We'll hopefully continue and use entertainment as a healthy outlet to not just distract or escape, but also kind of celebrate humanity, celebrate uniqueness, celebrate weirdness, pay with your dollars, go buy movies, books, comics, whatever, to support people that may not get money now or are struggling financially. I'm always about vote with your dollars. Sometimes you have
Yes.
more power. You have more
Yes.
power with your dollar, consumer dollar, sometimes than at the voting booth. So, and also just be there for each other and give people
Mhm.
grace, because this is going to be a
Yeah.
time where a lot of people are freaking out. And that's why I always like go to horror, because it's like, hey, at least
Mhm.
at least it isn't aliens. At least we're not. Like, I'm always trying to put a positive
Bonnie
spin.
Burton calling it now. 2026 will have aliens in it.
I hope so,
2025 will
because
have aliens in it.
you tell I would love an alien invasion, because that would flip the immigrant issue so hardcore
Oh,
that I would
bleh.
be like, yeah, do you want to tell this spaceship that they have to respect our borders? What fence are we going to build for these guys? So I
All of a
wish we
sudden
would
they've
have
got a
alien invaders.
dome.
I'm just putting that out there right now. But hey, entertainment's there for a reason. It's not just to, it's there to help us escape and for us to like regroup. It's okay. We'll get through it. We'll survive. We'll be good. We'll be there for each other. But use Interview with a Vampire as your first gateway into thinking about something else.
Just a little bit of light trivia on this episode because we went deep and we covered a lot of stuff here. The only thing that we didn't quite cover here was a question that I had for who was the youngest person ever to win an Academy Award? Because we had Kirsten Dunst, she was very, very young. She was nominated, but actually, the youngest person to be nominated and win an Academy Award is Tatum O'Neal. Now, Kirsten Dunst was 11 in this movie. Tatum O'Neal was 10 when she was in Paper Moon, which is impressive. And it makes sense as to why she was in that. Her father, Ryan O'Neal, played opposite her as her father in the film. Paper Moon is about a con man who winds up meeting a young girl who insists that is her father, and they wind up going around kind of swindling people by selling fake Bibles. It's a Peter Bogdanovich film, and it's worth watching if you're curious. It's a really great performance by a 10-year-old, as you can tell. The youngest male to ever win an Academy Award is actually much, much older than 10. It's 29. It's Adrian Brody, and he won it for being in The Piano. And that left me with just one more question, which was who is the youngest person to win any kind of acting award in the United States outside of, say, like the Oscars? Maybe it was for film, maybe it was for television. The answer? Ricky Schroeder. Ricky Schroeder was 9 when he was in the film The Champ, and he won a Golden Globe. Now, that was a Franco Zeffirelli film starring John Voight, where John Voight played a boxer who was trying to regain his past glory and reconnect with his son and the difficulties between their relationship. The son was played by Ricky Schroeder. If you're curious, though, to go even further, the youngest person who have ever won any kind of acting award is actually an actress who was in the film Ponette. Victoire Thiesselval, and I hope that I am saying that French actress's name correctly, she won Best Actress in 1996 in the Volpe Cup when she was 5. So, if you were watching this and you really thought Kirsten Dunst's performance is pretty good, I would love to see the depths to which children can be very good actors. Check out this film. Again, it's Ponette. Also, you could check out The Champ with Ricky Schroeder. I do think that Ponette is just a little bit better acting, but you got some options there for you to check out. And that's all we have for this episode this time. Very interesting and fun, long conversation with Bonnie. And Again, this was recorded Thursday after the elections that were that week of Tuesday. So I'm really impressed that either of us were able to come together and focus on talking about something, and then to have that be such a joy, such a distraction, such a wonderful way to spend our evening, that I really hope that that comes across to you guys, and that we can give you a little bit of a reprieve, a little bit of a distraction, and you can come spend some time with us, and that this has been in any way helpful for you guys. If that's the case, if even one of you gets hit that way, in the way that Bonnie and I were, then I feel like I'm doing my job. If you listened all the way to the end, this is again my reminder to go watch the Adam McKay episode that will be tonight, the 15th, at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Movie Night Extravaganza's channel, which you'll see in the liner notes. And of course, thanks so much for making it all the way to the end. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day.